Chapter 1. Overview. When attempting to compile the diverse stories of Egyptian mythology, a certain series of challenges presents themselves. Out of all the divine pantheons that make up the body of mythology and folklore, the ancient Egyptians very well may have developed the most complicated and multifaceted one in the entire history of the world. Their belief system can be viewed both exoterically as well as esoterically, and as such, every myth associated with ancient Egypt has multiple versions, and in very few cases, any two versions of a story are the same. Because there are so many varied interpretations of the Egyptian myths, many of the deities within their pantheon have been given different names, and in some cases, entirely different statuses, functions, and personalities. It is important to keep in mind that the Egyptian people did not create so many different versions of their myths through arbitrary means. Isis, for example, has stories that cast her in the light of a divine mother and protect her, while also acting as the complete opposite to those traits in other stories. Most likely, there were multiple correspondences associated with Isis, and the best way to demonstrate that was to tell different stories showing off the multiple attributions of her. This theme parlays onto the rest of the gods and myths, and is not exclusive to Isis. It should also be noted that Egypt underwent many alterations throughout its history and interacted with several other cultures. Many different people who were real were added to the myths as time went on. Like the gods, though, many of these people have different names depending on where the source of their stories originated. To reduce the confusion that is prevalent when studying Egyptian mythology, this has been designed to tell two separate interpretations of the myths. Chapter 2, Myths of Creation, contains two stories that are meant to be read as one narrative. The theme of these stories is that the creator god Re descends to Earth after he comes into manifestation and oversees the development of mankind directly himself. Chapter 3, Egyptian Gods and Goddesses, is also meant to be read as one narrative. Each story leads into the next in sequential order. Both chapters 2 and 3 follow the deity Ra. In chapter 2, he is called Re, and in chapter 3, he is called Amun-Ra. Although these are the same deity, the contents of their myths are not the same. Aside from the theory that both Re and Amun-Ra were born from a substance called the Nun, almost the entire contents of both chapters 2 and 3 are entirely different. Chapter 3 has been constructed with the intention of blending together different interpretations of the myths. This was done so for the purposes of entertainment. Chapter 4, Classic Egyptian Myths, has three stories that are all intended to be read as one narrative. They are the Book of Thoth, Say Osiris, and the Sealed Letter, and the Land of the Dead. Every other story found in Chapter 4 can be read either as standalone stories or as extensions from chapters either 2 or 3. Please remember that the Egyptians viewed their pantheon of gods symbolically. It is recommended that you try to think in terms of metaphors when reading this book. Chapter 2, Myths of Creation. Nun. Creation was absent. There was no form. There was no force. There was no shape. All was tenuous and sinuous. Time had not yet begun. There was no dimension, no direction. There was no space to contain any form. There was no force to emanate any space. This mundane and abstract pool of nothing was the beginning before there was a beginning. Yet, there was something beyond and above force, form, and existence. It would never be seen by the eyes of man. It could never be fathomed, for it far exceeded the limited capability of the human brain. It was negative to existence, a polar opposite that predated form, force, and time. This unknowable beginning was Nun. It was nothingness. It was none. Nun. The Nun was and will forever be beyond description. Any word, thought, idea, anything that would dare to describe the Nun would fail. The Nun was death before the first birth. The noon was silence before the first sound. The noon was an unopened package which had no recipient. The noon was preeminence before the first principle of existence had been issued. The noon was one singular point, lacking cohesion, yet also having it. It was whole, yet broken. It was incomplete, yet perfect. It had begun without any genesis. It had never been born, but still was always there. It was zero, a voidless void. It was without value, but contained all values. All was noon. None was noon. The noon was a paradox. Noon, that which is beyond description, can only be conceived as a watery abyss. There is no other image that can accurately portray noon. To dare label the noon with anything within the observable, knowable universe would be sheer folly. A mind and intellect that far surpasses human consciousness would be required to understand the noon truly. To the mere mortals of the cosmos, the noon would always be thought of as a dark and chaotic, watery abyss. Noon was nothing, yet nothing is something. To comprehend the paradox of noon, the something that is nothing, a chaotic, watery abyss devoid of light is the only smidgen of a clue that can be offered. Attempting to convey such concepts would be akin to explaining the color orange to a man who was born blind, or waiting for a bird with clipped wings to fly. From within, or beyond the noon, came the first inkling of something that was not nothing absolute. This was the first spark, the first force, the first sound, the first vibration. It was a meek yet almighty ripple in noon. It was the first activity that opened the paradox of noon. This primary ripple of all creation made a noise which all of the yet-to-be-manifested universes heard. This initial activity of Genesis, this first sound, the first word, and the name was Ptah. Ptah came as a wave. It acted all at once with unrestricted vigor. Why it had done so would never be known and could never be comprehended. How it did so would also forever remain a mystery. It had come, spoke its name, and receded back into noon. From Ptah's will, noon had been opened. All that was nothing could potentially become anything. The watery abyss of noon started to rollick back and forth. These were the first primordial motions that can only be conceived as the expansion of space. With the coming of space, there could be more. Growth, expansion, dimensions, directions, forces, and time. Although Ptah receded back into or beyond noon, a piece of it would remain evermore. Since Ptah was the beginning, it could not entirely remove itself from the action of first creation. All actions have consequences, and Ptah was the very first action. Every issue of activity that would ever happen would always be a consequence of Ptah opening noon. No matter how much space expanded, or the coming universe evolved, Ptah would remain in one way or another. From the largest planet to the smallest particle, all would be nothing more than the atoms or memories of Ptah. Ptah very well may have created itself out of sheer will. For a force as powerful as Ptah, it may have taken nothing more than wanting to exist. Ptah may have thought itself into creation, and if so, then all of existence is nothing more than the thoughts of Ptah. Before Ptah came and opened noon, the dreamless slumber of the Creator had not yet proclaimed the principles that would forever create and sustain all of reality. This inactive mental state of God is chaos. All that ever was or will be are nothing more than the children of disorder. When God awoke and executed the first thought and opened noon, awareness was introduced into what we call the universe. This awareness that was noon, or came from noon, can also be thought of as wisdom. For wisdom is not knowledge. Wisdom is the truth. God, noon, Ptah, only knows the truth. Illusions would be for the creations that were to follow the first thought of God. The nefariously misunderstood battle between good and evil first began when the awareness that came from Ptah first activated. Before Ptah opened Nun, all was disorderly chaos that lacked light and life. After God's first thought issued forth, causing Ptah to open Nun, the principles of creation, the thoughts of God, began to attack the chaos of Nun that has remained innocent and stagnant since before time began. This chaos that predated all of creation is what mortals would believe to be evil. Then Ptah opened Nun and introduced order to chaos. This order that stemmed from the mind of God would, eventually, allow light and life to come into manifestation. The order that began to battle the chaos of Nun is what mankind would call good. One day, Ptah will act again and soak up everything that emitted from its first action. Everything. All that Nun would become will return to Ptah when evolution reaches completion. When that happens, all knowledge will be revealed, and every secret will be unveiled. Until then, the entire cosmos will be left to wonder, dream, and fail to comprehend how Ptah opened up Nun, or why. The story of Re. All was dark. Light was non-existent. The watery abyss of Nun was darker than the blackest night. The universe was blind and lacked solidity. Then, Ptah. Something had moved the dark, liquid chaos and opened up a crack in Nun. Through that tiny sliver of an opening, a ray of light emanated as one massive pillar. So great and brilliant was this light that all of the darkness of Nun vanished all at once. Nun did not disappear, but it was covered by a blanket of light that would forever hide its presence from all of reality. This light that shattered the darkness was the first manifestation of something that was not chaotic or static, yet it had also arisen from the Nun. The pillar of brilliant light festered over all of Nun, vibrating a new form of existence into the watery chaos. The Nun started to shift more, rippling about itself and transmuting its chaotic lack of structure into an ethereal and omnipotent light. All at once, what had always been dark and sinuous, what had only been nothing, was transformed. This new form of existence was light, and it was the first birth in all of creation. The pillar of light then condensed upon itself. It grew brighter and brighter, slowly solidifying into one concentrated pillar of not etheric light, but a solid luminescence. The light that was the first aspect of creation demanded to expand further, but to do that it would first have to take a shape capable of exploration. It needed to become more than just a ray of all-encompassing light. The light needed both a solid body and an intelligence that is capable of organizing the light into proper order. This first form, this first intelligence, this first life that would breed all life that was to follow, stepped out of the pillar of luminescence. I am Re. He announced his name to all of the Nun as well as the light that had overtaken it. All the light was himself, and he was the light. They were one and the same. The light had created the first life form, Re, but they were not separate beings. As the light that had seeped out of Nun would watch over the entire cosmos, Re had a more specific task, and he wasted no time going straight to work on his divine mission. He looked around at the light that was shining from and around him. Beneath his light, he could feel the waters of Nun vibrating. The Nun whispered a silent voice to him. Re understood that the chaos of Nun wanted to resist his efforts to organize an entire universe. Re silently responded to the Nun and told it that this must be done. The plane of form had waited too long to be brought into being. Re and the Nun shared silent words that were only meant for the ears of the gods to hear. Re told the Nun that life must begin or else everything would forever remain stagnant, latent, and dark. The light needed to spread life. The chaos had to be organized. The universe had to be created. If these things were not supposed to be, then the Nun would never have opened. The Nun listened to Re, the light's argument, and accepted a compromise. Re and the Noon agreed that the universe was to be formed and populated with intelligent living creatures. Yet, the Noon told Re that his mission would not be easy. "I will challenge every step you take. We both have our respective roles to play." Re accepted the intention of the Noon, and then he stepped forward. With his first step came the first form of solid substance besides his own body. He lifted his foot in the etheric light, and when it stepped back down, a mound of matter had formed under his heel. He took another step, and more matter came into being. With each step that Re took, the chaos of Noon that was hiding under the light changed from a liquid nothing into a solid something. Just by moving forward, Re was beginning to organize the unstable chaos into a suitable sphere to contain all the particles that would create the stars, planets, and life forms in the universe. "With each step I take, with each thought I have, with each passing moment that I exist in this form, time ticks. Time is my greatest gift and most steadfast curse. For the chaos of Noon to morph into order, time is needed." He continued to explore his light while creating each second of time and every particle of matter with each step. Yet, more organization was still needed. His light was going to need a law to follow, a cycle of operation. Without an establishment of cosmic laws, anything that he was going to create would simply slide back into the chaos of Noon. "I decree that there will be a dawn, then there will be the noon, then there will be the setting, then there will be the night, then the cycle will repeat again. With each revolution of this cycle, there will be change and growth. This law may not be broken. My light will follow this law, and by doing so, the order will remain unmolested by chaos." He began to focus his concentration on the particles of matter that were forming under his feet and within his light. The light began to disperse, but not separate. Throughout the bubbling and forming universe, the light began to concentrate upon specific points in space. Re dubbed these focused concentrations of light to be the stars. He observed his sandbox of creation and told some of his stars that they were to continue lighting up the darkness of Noon until they had become too exhausted. When they could no longer shine, they would be allowed to return to Re. Yet, there were some stars that he gave a different purpose to. "Hear me, my children." Re spoke to some of his new-formed stars. "You are me, and I am you. Your mission is my mission. I desire life to exist in this space we have created." With his command given, some of the stars began to highlight certain fragments of the solid matter that was just starting to etch itself out of chaos. Re selected one of these still developing mounds as his new home. "I decree that this shall be called land. I decree that this land where I will dwell will be called Egypt. From here, all intelligent life shall begin." Re descended down into the land of Egypt, which was nothing more than a shallow hill rising out of both the waters of Noon and the light of Re. He left his stars in the waters of Noon to keep his light in the darkness while he went to begin the next phase of his divine operation. The first thing Re did after descending to the hill of Egypt was to experiment with the different versions of forms that he could create. Re could take any shape he wanted and tried on several different guises while trying to determine which forms would be most suitable for the different elements of creation that he was manifesting. After shapeshifting through millions of different forms, he settled on a body that would be suitable to represent the goal of his mission. He made his body that of a hominid that would eventually walk the ground of Egypt. For his head, he selected the form of a creature that would be called the Hork. With his body chosen, home selected, and the cycle of time established, he continued his scheme of divine organization. Re's voice was the breath of life. Whatever he spoke would manifest the chaos of nothing into a living and functioning, fully formed being. While standing upon the small mound that was Egypt, he decided to speak again and thrust more intelligent order out of the chaos of Noon. He first said, "Shu." Then the winds were spawned and blew over Egypt. Shu was the air and the first element of earth. Re then said, Tefnut. Then his daughter was born, and she was moisture. Shu and Tefnut swirled about each other, and the first rains fell. Re was greatly pleased with his children. Although the intrinsic particles of matter and the stars were his first creations, Shu and Tefnut were the first elements. With his newborn son and daughter assisting him, the tiny mound of Egypt could begin to grow more while being organized by the cycle of light and time. As Shu and Tefnut began to fertilize the growing mound of Egypt, Re spoke other names into existence. Geb. Then the tiny mound of Egypt began to expand rapidly. It expanded outward and mixed with the waters of Nun while being energized by the light of the stars. Nut. Then the sky leaped out of the waters of Nun and joined the earth of Geb. His second daughter, Nut, was to be the atmosphere that would contain the air and moisture of Shu and Tefnut. Yet, Nut was resistant to separate from her brother Geb. Nut wanted to remain on the ground of Geb, but Re knew that would prevent more lives from being established. He ordered Shu, the air, to lift Nut up and hold her over the ground of Geb for all of eternity if need be. Shu followed his father's command and lifted Nut up over Geb, thus separating the earth from the sky. Satisfied, Re spoke another name, Thoth. Unlike the other children Re had spoken into existence, who were forces of nature, Thoth had a different task. Re told Thoth that he was charged with the responsibility of being the great organizer of life. Hear me, Thoth. Chaos will forever try to undo all that will ever be done. It is up to you to maintain order through all time. I have brought the light. I have established the cycle of time. I have created the principles that all of existence will abide by. Yet it is up to you to make sure that these principles are not broken. You, Thoth, shall be the scribe of my wants and organizer of all intelligent life. Thoth understood his mission immediately. None would be wiser than Thoth, but his wisdom revealed to him that such an important task as his would require extra assistance. Thoth asked for another to help him to maintain the order of intelligent life. So, Re spoke another name, Ma'at. Then Ma'at came into being, and she instantly embraced Thoth. Re then spoke more names, Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys. Each god and goddess that Re had created was all given specific tasks and functions. Every one of these divine beings went about the work that Re had charged them with. Some of them were obedient to Re's mission, while others were more rebellious. Many of them conceived their own children between each other, and those children were also given specific tasks to maintain order and life. Re sent his children off to perform their selected roles as he continued to stand in the center of the still developing earth and Egypt. From his hill that was the first form of matter on the earth, he spoke into creation the river that he called the Nile. He then spoke all the names of the animals that were to populate his planet. Then, he finally spoke the words, humans, men, women. Thus, mankind was born. Re had so far succeeded in his cosmic scheme. He had brought the light out of the darkness. He had established time and given the light a cycle to follow. He had created matter. He had given birth to the elements. He had separated the ground and sky. He had established an environment within Egypt that was suitable to be the house of mankind. He formed the Nile. He had given birth to the animals. He had created humanity. Re left Thoth, Ma'at, and the rest of his children. He transformed his horp-like head into that of a normal man and established himself as the first pharaoh of Egypt. From his royal palace, he planned to not only observe what mankind would do with their gift of life, but also help them navigate all the troubles that were destined to befall upon them. Re never forgot that the Nun, although silent and hidden, would forever challenge his efforts to establish order over chaos. It did not matter if the men and women he had created were decent people or not. Nun would disturb all orderly peace without discrimination. Re crowned himself the first pharaoh. Then he grew old. He knew that the law of time that he had created would one day destroy his earthly body. He did not fear this because he knew that whenever his human body died, he would simply rejoin the light that had risen out of Nun. Yet there was a problem that had developed while Re ruled as a human pharaoh. At first, his people were devout, loyal, and respectful of his laws. As he grew older, though, the Nun had succeeded in spreading chaos into the minds of men and women. Many of his people were quickly losing respect for Re and had turned to acts of violence, lust, debauchery, and blasphemy. His own people had started to turn on him as his human body grew older and frailer. Many of them made fun of him and even went so far as to claim that he was not Re, the creator of heaven and earth, but just a feeble old man who was better off dead. Although his people's change of heart was discouraging to him, he let their sins pass for some time. As he grew older, though, he realized that when he passed away, another man would have to take his place as pharaoh. The people were going to have to learn how to govern themselves, but no one suitable to be crowned a king had emerged. As Re grew older, his people only broke his laws more. Angry and disappointed in his human children, Re spoke another name into existence: Sekhmet. Up to this point in the evolution of the planet, the people of Egypt had no threat. Then Re created Sekhmet, and mankind met their first true enemy. Sekhmet was the daughter of Re, born with the body of a woman but the head of a lion. She was to be the destroyer of mankind. Re did not just give her the fangs and claws of a lion, but he made her bloodthirsty. For Sekhmet to remain alive, she would literally have to drink the blood of humans, for that was the food that Re had selected her to be nourished by. Go, my avenger Sekhmet. Go and evoke terror into the hearts of men and women. If the humans will not change their ways by the course of my love, then maybe they will change their ways through the fear that you will instill in their hearts. Instantly, Sekhmet rushed out into the desert and began a trail of blood and dismemberment. She did not know of such things as sympathy, mercy, or remorse. She had been created to brutally kill any and every human she encountered. She swallowed entire limbs. She chomped down on intestines like they were links of sausage. She flayed the skin of men and savored each morsel as if she were chewing on a sweet treat. She drained the bodies of all their blood and poured it into the Nile so she could bathe in her favorite drink. By the end of her first day on Earth, she had covered her fur and flesh red. By the next morning, she was on the rampage again. Quite quickly, all the people of Egypt had learned of the terror that was Sekhmet. They tried to fight her off with swords and slingshots, but Sekhmet was indestructible. Every sword that was swung broke when they made contact with her skin. Battalions of men and women banded together to slay Sekhmet, and they all fell dead at her feet before she drank their blood. Re's plan had worked too well. The people of Egypt had come together and stopped their wicked ways. The threat of Sekhmet united them in a common effort to simply remain from becoming extinct. The lust, violence, and debauchery that the people had once happily partaken in suddenly came to a stop when Sekhmet unleashed her fury upon them. Re's people no longer had the option to do anything except fight or run from Sekhmet. Entire armies strategized and banded together to stop her, but they too were ripped to shreds and then eaten by her. The population of Egypt was shrinking at a rapid rate. Re recognized this as an error on his part. Before he had taken the body of a mortal man, he was infallible and perfect in every way. Yet as a human, he was as susceptible to error as was any other. He summoned Sekhmet before him and told her that her job was finished. She had united all of Egypt through the power of fear, and she must cease and desist before the power of fear scrambled too far out of control. If the fear was to grow any further, then the chaos of Nun would easily slip into the world that Re had created and wreak even more havoc. Also, if Sekhmet did not stop her spree of murder, then soon there would be no more humans left in Egypt. Sekhmet refused Re's order. She reminded him that while he was in the shell of a mortal man, she could easily kill him as well, then drink the blood of a god. Re cast her away from his temple and instantly began to devise a plan to correct the error that he had brought upon the people of Egypt. After heavy deliberation, the answer came to him. He first ordered the people of Egypt to go and retrieve a red ochre from the island called Elephantine. It took several days for his scouts to retrieve the red ochre and return to Egypt, and during that time, Sekhmet continued to murder without discrimination. Re then ordered the people of Egypt to mix the red ochre with beer. The Egyptians who once disrespected Re did not understand his plan, but they were so vexed by Sekhmet that they did exactly as he had ordered. Re demanded that there were to be 7,000 jars of beer dyed with the red ochre. This took several more days to accomplish, and Sekhmet continued to kill everyone she came across. When the people had finally made all the jars of red beer, Re ordered them to place the jars in the city of Heliopolis. So far, Sekhmet had not come to Heliopolis, and Re knew that it would be the next stop on her tour of murder and rampage. The people did as Re had ordered, and then waited for a miracle. Sekhmet arrived at Heliopolis and saw what she believed to be thousands of jars of blood. With the roar of a lion, she let out a mighty cackle. She was under the impression that the people of Heliopolis had left her offerings to prevent her from tearing them all limb from limb. Sekhmet only knew blood and murder. She had no idea what beer was. Thinking the red jars to be filled with blood, she drank every jar. After she was utterly drunk, Re sat down next to her in the street of Heliopolis. He had watched her drink all the beer and could confirm that she had not killed a single person all day. Even more, when drunk, she was a symbol of kindness, peace, and far from bloodthirsty. This nature is far more suitable for you, my dear daughter. Sekhmet said nothing in return. She was far too drunk to speak. She only grinned and purred at the foot of her father. Tell me, my daughter, would you rather remain as you are now, or become a great murderess again? Sekhmet said nothing, and only smiled drunkenly. Yet, Re could converse not just with words, but with the heart. He felt Sekhmet's intentions, and understood that she would rather remain in a state of bliss, rather than rage. Then, it is decided, Re told her. From now on, you will no longer be Sekhmet the killer, but are now reborn as Hathor. When Hathor sobered up, she retained the loving joy that had entered her heart while drunk. She had lost her bloodlust, but had gained instead a lust for love. Hathor went on to become one of the most respected and beloved of all the Egyptian deities, who protected her people from harm and gave love as unbiased as Sekhmet had given death. A few more years went by, and Re had become terribly old. While Re ruled as a human pharaoh, his other children went through their own share of adventures and misfortunes. Many different things, both great and horrible, happened to Osiris, Isis, Nephthys, and Set. Eventually, Isis had decided that Re was taking too long to leave Egypt in the hands of his children. She had decreed to remove Re from the world of mortality, all on her own. The combination of her own hardships, along with the bloody episode of Sekhmet, had convinced Isis that she could not wait any longer for old age to return Re back to heaven. She had to do it herself. She visited her father and saw him in a terribly feeble state. He had grown so old that spittle was dribbling out of his mouth. Isis knew that the saliva of Re, like his breath, could create new life. So, Isis rolled his spit into the mud and created the first snake. She then held the snake up to Re and whispered a command to it. The snake followed her order and bit Re, infusing his body with a vile toxin. Unlike every other creature, the snake of Isis was not created by Re, and he had no power to stop the toxin from spreading through his body. He also did not see her create the snake or hold it up to him, for his senses had dulled along with his old age. He held Isis's hand and told her that he was in a great and terrible pain. Isis had the ability to heal, for the power of magic was under her provision. He asked her to help heal his pain. Isis understood something that many of the other gods did not know. She knew that Re went by several names, and one of the names he had always kept as a secret. If another besides himself knew of his secret name, then they too would have a power equal to his. I can't heal you unless I know your secret name. Without knowing the true name of God, I am unable to heal the true God. Reluctantly, Re told Isis his secret name. She then cast a spell which utilized the secret name of God. Her spell worked and healed Re of all his pain, yet the toxin had spread too far. Quickly after he was healed, his mortal life came to an end. After Re passed away, the younger gods took over rulership of Egypt and began a new era of history and evolution, with Isis playing a pivotal role. Re's human body died. He rejoined the light that had given birth to all creation. Once again perfect, he realized how much he had learned while living as a human being. My time there was not for naught. I am even wiser now than I was before becoming human. Yet my time away from heaven has given way to disorder. This must be fixed. Re then created a heavenly airship. The cycle of his light had grown weak, and he swore to correct the order of time and light from the chaos of noon. He fastened the sun to his airship and took hold of the helm. Every day, Re would make sure that the sun rose in the sky above Egypt, then set and then disappear, only to rise again the next day. With the younger gods down below watching over man, with Hathor spreading the gift of love to all the people of Egypt, and with Re at the helm of the sun making sure that it followed the cosmic cycles he had established, the order would continue to defend against the force of chaos. Chapter 3. Egyptian Gods and Goddesses. Amun-Ra and his children. In the beginning, there was only the Nun. The Nun was dark and sinuous. It lacked both shape and force. It could be compared to a silent vibration that was static and stuck in repose instead of locomotion. Deep inside the Nun, there was a desire to remain as it was, free from the responsibility and troubles of a physical existence. Yet there was also a longing will to create a physical world and watch it grow. This conflict of intentions had kept the Nun from taking any action. Until the Nun took action, the universe was not allowed to experience Genesis. This internal quandary of remaining as unmanifested chaos or changing into a manifested order was the intrinsic struggle that predates all of creation. As long as the Nun remained as one pool of dark nothing, no compromise to its dilemma of remaining as chaos or turning into order would ever be resolved. Some have said that the dark waters of Nun were originally catatonic consciousness. The mind of the universe was silently sleeping in a deep, dreamless slumber. Then it somehow awoke, and with its awakening came the first semblance of activity on the entire universe. This first thought unleashed the mental activity of what can only be compared to God. This first thought would be the seed that planted every subsequent thought that would ever follow. All the ideas of the gods who operated under the presidency of Nun's first thought, as well as the thoughts of every beast and human, would only be grosser reflections of God's first moment of awareness. When the Nun awoke, it recognized that it was suffering a dissonance. A part of it wanted to remain as the unmanifested chaos that it was, while another part wanted to break free from the shackles of being not uniform and create order. To reconcile its internal conflict of interests, the noon broke itself into several different, separate pieces. Maybe that was God's method of performing a sort of self-psychology. Out of the chaos that was the noon rose a reflection of itself called Apep. Like the chaos that had manifested it, Apep was sinuous and silent. Apep has been called the great snake that can encircle all of reality. Apep with living chaos. Apep had no limits. Apep was the first vibratory form. Apep was the limitless shape of chaos. Chaos, noon, was to have no shape, yet it had taken the form of Apep, and Apep was the living chaos that was to remain formless. Without realizing it, Apep was an enemy to itself. Simply by existing, Apep had broken its own intrinsic rule of remaining chaotic. Apep's manifestation was the first action of order, and more order had to emit forth. More order started to rise out of the living chaos of Apep, the child of Nun. The second wave of the order was Atum, also known as Amon, Amen, and many other titles. What was originally only one, in the form of Nun, first took shape as Apep. Then Atum was born, and the one thing became more than one. Silent, yet able to communicate, Atum and Apep observed each other, and universal awareness expanded further. Chaos observed order, and order observed chaos. Order, Atum, knew it was born out of chaos and desired more freedom. Atum had the will to separate from the chaos of Nun and Apep. Apep knew that if he swam deeper into Nun, then he would spread more order and slowly eradicate chaos. If that were to happen, if chaos were to be completely erased, then the order would organize and grow endlessly. If chaos were to be completely usurped, then the Nun and Apep would no longer exist. If Nun were to be overthrown, then reality would have no substance to build upon, because that substance was Nun itself. Apep, the wise serpent, knew that chaos could exist without order, as it had done before, but the order could not exist without chaos. For the universe to remain existent, it would either have to be a perfect balance of order and chaos, or it would have to be entirely chaotic. Order fought to break away from the chaos, and the chaos demanded to restrain the order. Both desired to counter and control the other. Thus, the endless battle of good and evil had begun. Apep wrapped its coils around Atum. Atum's boundless will struggled to be released from the eternal clutches of Apep. Apep covered Atum until he disappeared and was seemingly swallowed back into the watery chaos. They had been joined together again, despite Atum's protest to explore and experiment with the force of creation. It seemed as if Apep had won. The order was pinned down, while unformed chaos would remain. Yet, because the Nun had already created Apep and Atum, the force of time had already begun. When Apep swallowed Atum, it was already too late to stop the divine and cosmic scheme of creation. While Atum struggled to be released from Apep, and while Apep held tightly onto Atum, chaos and order were mingling. Out of this struggle between orderly good and chaotic evil, the universe would rise. The Nun that had originally created Apep, then Atum, would never go away. Nun is the very substrate that all matter would be built from. The eternal struggle between order and chaos would continue to produce more order, and then produce an equal amount of chaos to keep the order in check. The stars, planets, entire galaxies, and every life form that would roam these galaxies would never be anything more than chess pieces in the tug-of-war between order and chaos. There was only Atum wrapped up in the coils of Apep. The contest between the two remained in a stalemate for unknown millennia. Atum was the god of creation, and his only equal was Apep, the god of chaos. Being equals, it was not possible for one to overpower the other directly. Before Nun had spawned Apep, there was nothing else to compare chaos with, and thus chaos was perfect by proxy. Then Atum rose and had a strong desire to will order into the chaos. This change of dynamics scared Apep, so Apep wrapped its coils around Atum and held on for dear life. Although one could not overpower the other, Apep had a stronger ability to bind things down and keep them the same, while Atum had a stronger ability to set things in motion and induce change. Somehow, Atum defeated Apep's shackles and he freed himself from Apep. Atum knew that complete separation from the Nun was impossible, but if enough of the Order could arrange into a manifested physical reality, then the Nun would be too preoccupied to swallow Atum again. During Atum's first few moments of freedom, it silently spoke into the waters of the Nun. "Arise, Shu." Then the principle of the air was born. Shu, the air, was the first child of Atum. Shu was inactive at birth, for there was nowhere yet to place air, but he had still been manifested into reality. Then Atum spoke into the Nun again. "Arise, Tefnut." Then the principle of moisture came into existence. Like Shu, there was nowhere to place the moisture. Both Shu and Tefnut were with function but without purpose. They were also, as dubbed by Atum, the intrinsic principle of gender when combined together. Shu was the masculine, Tefnut was the feminine. Atum knew that if he could find a place for the masculine and feminine to interact and develop a relationship, they would continue to give rise to even more order. The only issue was that they needed a place to work their magic of integration, and nothing besides themselves was yet developed in the universe. Atum told Shu and Tefnut to go and find a place where they could claim as their home. Then from there, they were to interact and develop more order and physical formations. Tefnut and Shu left Atum to explore the vast infinity of the Nun. Yet they strayed too far away, and not only failed to find a home in the Nun, but also became lost. Atum was alone in the waters of the Nun. His children had gone off to begin the mission of creation, but they had taken too long. While Atum was waiting for them, he could feel the coils of Apep rise up now and then in an attempt to reduce him to nothingness. He also began to miss his son and daughter. Not wanting to wait any longer, he decided to investigate where Shu and Tefnut had gone off to. Atum lacked a concrete physical form, but he had an essence to him that can be equated to an eye. This eye of Atum, if he willed it, could see and know everything that was happening in the Nun. To fully utilize his eye's power, though, he had to separate it from himself. So he sent his eye out to find Shu and Tefnut. Atum's eye contained all the constituents of the feminine principle. His eye, for lack of more accurate terms to define a god of Atum's caliber, was female. She wandered the waters of the Nun until she located Shu and Tefnut. Shu and Tefnut had coiled together as one force when the eye of Atum found them. They were scared to separate from each other, and the fear they shared, as well as not being able to find a suitable home within the Nun, prevented them from making any progress. When the eye found them, she told them to abstain from fear and follow her to Atum. Shu and Tefnut freely submitted to the eye and returned to Atum. While Atum's eye was gone, he was left almost defenseless against the coils of Apep. He needed his eye to keep the chaos at bay, or else he would be swallowed back into the Nun again. If Atum was retaken by Apep, then Shu, Tefnut, and his eye would all vanish as well. So Atum created another eye to take the first one's place while she was gone. His second eye was more masculine than feminine and helped to protect him against the threat of Apep quite effectively. If Atum could be able to combine both his eyes, and if Shu along with Tefnut was allowed to procreate, then the principle of gender could begin to truly take form and establish the universe. When Atum's first eye returned with Shu and Tefnut, she saw that Atum had created the second eye. Offended, jealous, and worried that she had been so easily replaced even after helping Atum be reunited with his children, Atum's first eye deserted him into the waters of Nun. Atum watched her leave with his new eye, and again he was stabbed by remorse. Ever since he had come into existence, Atum had faced one struggle after another. He had to battle off a pet. He had lost his son and daughter, and upon retrieving them, he had lost his eye. Atum recognized that his cosmic plan of ushering in the process of creation was not going to be a straightforward mission. He could not risk sending out his second eye to find the first, so he created another deity to locate his lost eye. Arise, Thoth. Then Thoth came into existence, and he was wisdom, along with many more traits and powers. Atum did not have to give Thoth any instruction, for Thoth knew exactly what his purpose was upon being created. Immediately after he came into existence, Thoth left to retrieve Atum's lost eye. Since Atum's first eye knew all and could see all, she was aware that Thoth was going to try and bring her back to the Father. She did not go easily, though. Yet, Thoth was pure wisdom and knew how to coerce the eye. He spoke to the eye for a very, very long time. The two debated on why they had both been brought into existence. They bantered over the battle of order versus chaos. They both shared knowledge about time and space that no mere mortal could ever hope to understand. Much time passed as Thoth and the eye formed a relationship. Thoth had eventually convinced her that Atum could put both of his eyes to use and establish an equilibrium between them. The eye had taken enough of a liking to Thoth to return with him to Atum. Even she, all-knowing as she was, had to admit that the words of Thoth made enough sense to inspire a compromise. While Thoth was negotiating with the eye, Atum watched over Shu and Tefnut. Although they still lacked a proper sphere to induce any solidity into the unmanifested universe, Atum told them to waste no more time interacting with each other. Shu and Tefnut followed their father's command and conceived two separate children. The first was Geb, who would become the Earth after a proper sphere of activity was located in the Nun. The second child of Shu and Tefnut was named Nut. She was similar to the Nun. She was a darkness that was destined to become the night sky. Even though Geb and Nut were born, it had taken so long for Atum's first eye to return that nothing else was yet allowed to be born after them. Geb and Nut were born intertwined with each other, and neither had any conception of what life without the other would be. Geb and Nut procreated 4 of their own children while waiting for Atum's eye to return, but these 4 offspring were trapped inside Nut's womb, and they would not be set free to come into existence until Geb and Nut had separated. Then Thoth returned with the eye. Atum placed his first feminine eye on his brow next to the second. The 2 eyes quickly realized that they were stronger together than apart, and from then on they worked together. Atum was so pleased with Thoth that he bestowed upon him a great honor and responsibility. Atum told Thoth, "You are to be the architect of all reality. My words, laws, and intentions will be delivered to you so that you may organize them and convert them into laws that all of reality will follow. By doing this, Thoth, you will be the champion of order and truth." Thoth accepted his promotion with grace and dignity. Now that Atum had both of his eyes, had created Shu and Tefnut, and had found an architect in Thoth, there was only one final thing to fix before physical reality could be thrust into creation. Geb and Nut had to be separated from each other, otherwise the children that they produced would forever remain stuck inside Nut's womb. Atum ordered Shu to lift up Nut and separate her from her lover and brother, Geb. Nut resisted, but Shu overpowered her and lifted her above Geb. Anyway, after Nut, the sky was removed from Geb. Matter started to fill the waters of Nun. Planets started to form into being, and the first primordial mass that extended from Geb would be called the Earth. Within the Earth there would be a central point of beginning that would be called Egypt. Within this land of Egypt, all the children of Atum would finally have a place to perform their great work. Geb was the Earth, and hanging above him was the sky of Nut. Between them was Shu, the air. Tefnut, the moisture, intermingled with all three of them and helped to establish the atmosphere of the planet Earth. After so much waiting and struggling, Atum's plan of creation was starting to take massive strides of progress. After Gerb and Nut were separated, the children inside Nut's womb were finally allowed to step into the world of creation. All at once, Isis, Nephthys, Osiris, and Set were born. Atum was very satisfied with three of these new forces which were his grandchildren. Yet, Set reminded him of Apep, and because of this, he was very wary. Even so, all the pieces were now in place for Atum to begin the culmination of his struggles. With an earth established and an atmosphere to support it, along with a pantheon of gods to govern it, the land of Egypt was almost ready to receive the gift that would be known as life. Thoth will govern the laws and truth. Shu is the heir. I, Atum, will now come down and join you in the land of Egypt. Then Atum made another being that was an exact, yet more condensed, version of himself. This new being was named Amun-Ra, and he was the direct son of Atum, the son of God. This new form of Atum, Amun-Ra, then created the shining sun that would hang over the sky of Nut. The first phase of manifestation had been completed. The land of Egypt now had a sun which would make it suitable for life. Yet the sun was so important that Amun-Ra had chosen to govern that celestial sphere by himself, instead of placing it in the hands of one of his children. Being the direct son of Atum and being in control of the sun, Amun-Ra selected himself as the king of the gods. Amun-Ra told Isis and Nephthys that they were to act together as a second and darker light than the sun. This reflection of sunlight was also called the moon. Since life was about to begin, both Isis and Nephthys were also to help manage the process of death that was to follow the activity of life. They were also both given other powers and responsibilities as well, including fertility and watching over the crops that life would need to sustain itself. Osiris was also charged with governing fertility, but was given another very important task. Amun-Ra told Osiris that he would soon create mankind, and Osiris was to be the leader of this new species. Then Amun-Ra spoke to Set. Set was like Apep, an extrapolation of chaos. Atum knew that there was nothing he could do to eradicate chaos permanently, so he told Set to be careful and not let his fiery nature carry him too far astray. Set was given control over the storms and force of destruction, as that was his true nature. Amun-Ra then created more children. He gave birth to Maat, who would act as the living embodiment of order. As long as Maat lived, so would order. She was to represent all that was good and true, and because of this, she was joined together with Thoth in marriage. Then Amun-Ra created a being with two aspects named Sekhmet or Hathor, who could either spread infinite love or hatred, depending on what she saw fit. He then created Anubis, who would also play a pivotal role in governing the dead along with Isis and Nephthys. With his pantheon established, Amun-Ra then created all of the plants and animals. Then he was finally ready to create mankind. He was so stirred by the emotions of having created a pantheon of gods that tears began to fall from his eyes, and these tears took form as the first men and women of Egypt. Amun-Ra's final act before taking the helm of the sun was to give each of the gods and goddesses a form to represent them. All of the gods were given bodies like mortal men and women, but some were given the heads of animals. Thoth was given the head of an ibis. Hathor could take on the head of either a cow or lion. Anubis was given the head of a jackal. Maat could take either the form of a woman or a feather. Set was given a composite form that was comprised of a dog, snake, fox, and a donkey. This form was fitting for Set, since he was a manifestation of chaos, which had no standard form. For himself, Amun-Ra selected the head of a hawk, but he could also change into any shape he wanted whenever he desired. No matter what form Amun-Ra would don, there would always be a beacon of light shining above the crown of his skull. Amun-Ra then boarded a ship that could carry the sun through two 12-stage cycles, which he dubbed as the hours, and there were 24 of them in total. He then left his children to govern the new species of mankind, with Osiris as their leader. The story of Isis and Osiris. While the land of Egypt was blossoming into a prominent nation, the gods all performed their various roles. Thoth helped to take the laws of Atum and organize them into disciplines so that mankind would be able to understand and work from. Thoth created geometry, mathematics, language, astrology, and many other intellectual avenues to educate man on how the universe functioned. All of these laws he wrote down and passed along to his wife Maat. Once Maat was given the organized laws of Thoth, she handed them down to man. Thoth's main role was to organize the orders of Atum, but it was Maat who was to uphold and spread the organization of Thoth. It would, later on, be said by mankind that to uphold Maat was to uphold the laws of God. Amun-Ra carried the sun throughout the sky across the back of Nut, following the two 12-hour cycles he had created. Anubis and Hathor also performed their selected functions without diverging from the goals of Atum. Osiris and Set both went about building their own temples in Egypt. They, at first peacefully, debated over who would be their consorts. Osiris chose Isis to be his lover, and this is where the trouble between Set and Osiris first began. Isis and Nephthys did not want to be separated, and they both fancied Osiris over Set. Even so, since Osiris had chosen Isis, Nephthys had no choice but to go with Set. For many years these two pairings coexisted while waiting for mankind to become developed enough to be deserving of having Osiris as their king. Time went by. Every day Amun-Ra would raise the sun high in the sky, and every night he would take the sun into the underworld below, only to be born again the next day. For a very long time this was all the people of Egypt knew. Then, by the wisdom of Thoth and grace of Maat, the Egyptians began to become more intelligent and sophisticated. They had evolved enough to be worthy of a divine leader, and when that time came, Osiris revealed himself to mankind and became the first pharaoh of Egypt, with Isis as his queen. Many more years passed by, and humanity was developing at a fine rate. Both Osiris and Isis were fabulous leaders, and Amun-Ra was very pleased with how the Egyptians were developing. On the other side of Egypt, Set and Nephthys were also performing their roles diligently. Set destroyed whatever form of matter had outlived its usefulness, and Nephthys helped Set to keep his temper under control. A proper balance was established between Osiris and Set, mostly due to the help of their queens, Isis and Nephthys. For the first several thousand years of humanity, there were minor moments of imbalance, but Set and Osiris were not at odds with each other. Thus, everything went along at a smooth rate of progression. Yet, one of the goddesses had a change of heart, and this would introduce disharmony into the world. Nephthys had been separated from Isis and Osiris for so long that her heart had grown too full of want. She learned in time to love Set, but her true desire was always to be with Osiris. Not only that, but she longed to see her sister Isis again as well. After thousands of years, Nephthys could not withstand her heavy heart any longer, and she told Set that she was going to go visit Osiris and Isis. Set did not like this, but he had gone to great lengths to control his fury and rage. So, reluctantly, he let her go to see Osiris and Isis. There was much merriment when Nephthys reunited with her sister and brother. All three of them were ecstatic to be together again. Although Nephthys aimed to remain faithful to Set, she could not deny her desires. With the permission of Isis, Nephthys and Osiris began an affair. Both of Osiris's sisters had become his lovers, and he was overjoyed with the privilege that Atum had bestowed upon him. This triple pairing of Osiris, Isis, and Nephthys went on for some time, and all three of them became too addicted to each other to separate again. After Nephthys had been gone for too long, Set decided to go to the palace of Isis and Osiris and bring her back to his own palace. When he arrived, he found both Isis and Nephthys making love to Osiris. Although Set had gone to great efforts to not let his destructive fury spiral out of control, this discovery was too much for him to bear. Set was the force of destruction and an agent of chaos. The only thing that was keeping him balanced was his association with Nephthys, and she had given him up for Osiris. Instantly, Set placed a plan in motion to get revenge on Osiris, Nephthys, and Isis. Set announced that he was throwing a grand banquet to celebrate the thousands of peaceful years that all the gods had given to Egypt. All the gods except Thoth and Amun-Ra were invited to the banquet. Set had a devious plan in place, and he was sure that Thoth would see right through it, so he was not invited. Amun-Ra could not leave his boat that carried the sun, so he was not invited either. Yet all the other gods came, including Isis, Nephthys, and Osiris. At some point during the celebration, Set unveiled a coffin that he claimed was the exact measurements of one of the gods, but did not tell them which god it was. He then told everyone that whoever fit inside the coffin would be given a special reward. All of the gods were curious as to what the reward was and became eager to participate in Set's game. Anubis, Hathor, and many other gods tried out the coffin, but none fit inside. Then Osiris slid inside the coffin and announced that the measurements were exactly equal to his. "I must be the winner of your game, Set, my brother," Osiris happily said while resting in the comfort of the coffin. "Why, it seems you speak true, Osiris," Set said as he stood over the coffin and Osiris. "Then tell me, Set, what is my reward?" Osiris asked. "Osiris, you will be given the honor," Set said while raising his sword, "of being the first god to die." In front of the entire banquet of gods, Set plunged the sword into Osiris. Osiris screamed and struggled to fight back, but Set pinned him down and sliced out his tongue to silence his screaming. Many of the other gods, Isis and Nephthys included, tried to stop Set, but his fury was too great, as were his skills in battle. Set was the force of destruction, and since he had chosen to destroy Osiris, there was little any of the gods could do to stop him without placing themselves in grave danger. In front of everyone, Set diced Osiris up into 42 separate pieces. He cut out Osiris's tongue. He sliced off his penis and testicles. He removed both of his eyes. He cut off every finger and toe. He ripped out all of Osiris's organs. By the time Set had finished, there was nothing left of Osiris except for scattered body parts and rotting organs. Set then went about chasing the rest of the gods out of his palace. Isis and Nephthys reluctantly retreated, both swearing to avenge their fallen lover. Set laughed at their threats. He had not only killed another god, but had mutilated the body beyond recognition. The glowing pride began to fill within Set, and he went out to perform the next act of his vengeance against Osiris. Set unveiled himself before all the people of Egypt and announced that he had killed Osiris. He then showed them the mangled pile of body parts to prove what he said was true, and decreed that he was to become the new pharaoh of Egypt. By proving that he was capable of killing a god, none would dare to challenge Set's usurping of the throne. Set's first act after becoming the new pharaoh was to have Osiris's body parts scattered throughout all of Egypt. From corner to corner, the body of Osiris was buried underneath the suns and hidden away. Set then reclaimed Nephthys as his consort and forced her onto the throne next to him. Then Set began his reign as the ruler of Egypt without any challenges. From above Egypt, Amun-Ra watched all of this happen. He did not intervene on the mortal coil, though. Instead, he traveled to the underworld where he took the sun every night so he could meet with Osiris in the afterlife. Yet while there, Amun-Ra became trapped in the underworld looking for the soul of Osiris. With Amun-Ra gone, there was no sun in the sky. The reign of Set as pharaoh was a very dark age. Isis had her sister stolen away from her by Set again, and her lover Osiris had been brutally slain and dismembered before her very eyes. She fell into a dark despair during this time and set out to retrieve the body parts of Osiris no matter what challenge may lay before her. She asked both Thoth and Anubis for assistance in finding the remains of Osiris, but Anubis explained to her that there was nothing he could do. Anubis was in charge of the dead, but since Osiris's body had been decimated, even if Anubis wanted to return Osiris to life, there would be no body for his soul to return to. He also told Isis that Amun-Ra was stuck in the underworld searching for Osiris, and Anubis greatly wanted to return to the land of the dead to help Amun-Ra return the sun above Egypt. Thoth, in all his wisdom, was able to give Isis more help. He knew where the body parts of Osiris were buried and gave her a map to follow. Isis thanked Thoth and went about her journey to recover her dead lover's scattered remains. Many generations passed as Isis traveled the deserts of Egypt all alone. More than once she had almost given up, but her perseverance carried her on even during the most stressful of nights. One by one she located the pieces of Osiris and collected them all together. When she had finally gathered every piece of his body, she still knew that more would have to be done if she was to reunite the soul of Osiris with his body. Anubis had told her that a decimated body could not contain a soul, so the first thing she was going to have to do was put him back together again. She returned to the temple that once belonged to her and Osiris. Much had changed since Set took control of Egypt. Her once magnificent palace had broken down into a parody of its former self. Still, Isis was determined to bring her lover back to life. She asked the help of Thoth and Anubis again to help her return Osiris to life, and also sent a secret messenger to Nephthys. The messenger informed Nephthys that Isis had found all the pieces of Osiris and was planning to resurrect him. At once, Nephthys spirited away from Set and joined her sister inside the former temple of Osiris. Anubis, Thoth, Nephthys, and Isis all joined together with the collected body parts of Osiris. They all knew that sooner than later Set would discover that Nephthys was missing and begin to search for her. They did not have much time to bring Osiris back to life. Anubis, Isis addressed him. What is the status of Amun-Ra and Osiris in the underworld? Anubis explained that Amun-Ra had successfully met the soul of Osiris, and in the land of the dead Osiris had gained even greater power. Yet, when Osiris would return to the mortal coil, his power would be far lessened. He also explained that after Osiris had returned to life, Amun-Ra would be free to leave the land of the dead and return the sun to its proper place above the sky of Egypt. Isis then went about asking how exactly they could bring Osiris back to life. Both Thoth and Anubis told her that his body would have to be pieced together again, and that it would take the effort of everyone present to make such a miracle happen. Isis and Nephthys both had powers over life and death, as well as were experts in the art of magical healing. Anubis was in charge of the dead and embalming, while Thoth was pure wisdom. The four of them combined their powers and began to reconstruct the body of Osiris, one piece at a time. His limbs and flesh were pieced together and then wrapped in several layers of linen. His organs were all placed in separate jars, since they could not fit back inside the body. This process that the four gods created while trying to resurrect Osiris was known as mummification, and Osiris was the first mummy. After they had reconstructed Osiris the best they could, Nephthys and Isis began the spell of healing. Yet their time had run too short. While the sisters were performing their necromancy, Set busted through the walls of the palace like a bolt of lightning. The walls shattered upon impact, and Set invaded the temple, bringing a sandstorm in with him as he stepped inside. The fog of the sand twirled about Isis and Nephthys, but the two lovers of Osiris still mustered on to finish their spell of resurrection and transmutation. "So this is where you have run off to, my beloved Nephthys," said Set. "And look who has decided to aid this farce. Anubis, and Thoth the wise, I see. My, oh my. How will I be able to stop all of you? And what am I even trying to stop you from completing? Could it happen to be the rebirth of my vile brother Osiris? Isis and Nephthys continued to cast their spell, trying their best to withstand the sandstorm and ignore Set. Yet a great fear was starting to overtake them both. Beyond every doubt, Set was the greatest warrior among the gods. There were none who could rival his skill in battle. Whatever Set aimed to destroy would surely be destroyed. Both Thoth and Anubis knew this, and neither were foolish enough to challenge Set either. Yet Thoth stepped between Set and the sandstorm that had swallowed Isis, Nephthys, and the corpse of Osiris. "Stay your violent hands, Set," Thoth told the warrior king. "The return of Amun-Ra back from Duat depends upon Osiris coming back from the dead. This entire series of events has taken on a far greater meaning than your rivalry with Osiris." Although Set respected both Thoth and Amun-Ra, he would not be swayed away from his desire of retrieving Nephthys and keeping Osiris in the land of the dead. "I don't care, Thoth," Set said as he approached closer. "If my might just so happens to keep both Osiris and Amun-Ra in Duat, then my might must be right. Please listen to my words, Set." Thoth began to plead with the god of chaos, but Set had heard enough of Thoth's wise words. "Silence, Thoth. Your cunning tongue will not persuade me here nor there." "Do you wish to do battle with me?" Thoth asked Set. "Of course not," Set answered. "But I will. Do you wish to do battle with me?" Thoth didn't answer Set. He turned to Isis and Nephthys, who were in the midst of performing magic while being pummeled by Set's sandstorm. "I bid you both the best of luck. May Atum smile upon you." Thoth then vanished, but he did not leave the two sisters alone to defend against Set. An array of ethereal warriors rose out of the spot from where Thoth had vanished, and they rose their weapons against Set. Set chuckled. Thoth was wise enough to know that the guardians he had left behind would only prevent Set and not stop him. "What a trite joker Thoth can be," Set said as he readied his own sword. Anubis then stepped in front of Set, the same as Thoth did before he vanished. "Please, Anubis," Set said to him, "we both know that you do not have what it takes to best me in combat. In other contests, I would fear you, but when it comes to the sword, none can compare to my might." "I know that," Anubis said to Set. "I would never dare challenge you, mighty Pharaoh." "Then get out of my way," Set ordered. "I will. But first..." Then Anubis did the same as Thoth had. He vanished from the temple and returned to the underworld, where he could check to see how Amun-Ra and Osiris were doing. After he left, though, another army of warriors rose from the temple floor. The warriors of Thoth and Anubis joined forces and created a barrier between Isis, Nephthys, the mummified Osiris, and Set on the other side of them. Distractions and wastes of time," Set said as the two battalions blocked him from his sisters and dead brother. "Come at me, all of you. Do it all at once and we will see who is standing when the battle is over," Set told the warriors of Thoth and Anubis. Yet no one moved. None possessed the courage or stupidity to face Set in battle. "Scared?" Set asked them all. "Cowards. The lot of you are nothing more than mere cowards." Set then charged directly into the heart of both battalions and began to eviscerate every single one of them with violent ease. Limbs were severed, heads were decapitated. Blood splattered on the temple walls while the floor was coated in organs and bile. Isis and Nephthys continued to work their magic together while Set was busy with the warriors of Thoth and Anubis. The sandstorm was greatly harassing them, but they soldiered on. Yet, as Set was slaying the defenders, he was getting closer and closer. Nephthys saw no other choice but to utilize every ounce of power that she had and she used up almost all of her magical abilities all at once on the body of Osiris. She then started to lose strength and dropped to her knees. Before she had lost all her power, she gave her sister instructions. Isis, Osiris is almost healed. You no longer need my help. You can finish resurrecting him on your own. Take his body and leave this place before Set reaches you. I will do what I can to hold him off. I can't do that, Nephthys. Isis tried to argue, but her sister wouldn't listen to her. Go now, before it is too late. Begrudgingly, Isis listened to her sister. Like Thoth and Anubis had done, Isis used her magical powers to teleport away. What Nephthys had told her was true. Osiris's resurrection was almost complete, and it was no longer dangerous to move his body. But Isis had used up much of her energy while using her magic to resurrect Osiris, and she could not teleport very far. She hid with the body in another location inside the temple, hoping that she would have enough time to bring her husband back to life before Set found her again. When she completed her spell, the mummy of Osiris was enshrouded by a pillar of brilliant light. The light began to bond with Osiris, and slowly he began to stir. First, he could only wiggle his fingers, but then he lifted up his leg and took a step towards Isis. I have returned from the coma of death, Osiris the resurrected proclaimed. With tears of joy, he and Isis embraced. After so horribly long, Isis had managed to pull off what was even considered impossible among the gods. She had brought Osiris back to life. No other man or god had ever performed such a miracle before. They remained in each other's arms in total silence, for there were no words that could accurately express their emotions. They then kissed deeply, and as far as they were concerned, endlessly. When they broke their kiss, Isis peeled herself away from Osiris's loving embrace and took off her robe. She looked at her reborn husband in the eyes and made a divine request that would change the fate of both mankind and the gods alike. Osiris, my love, if the actions of Set have taught us anything, it is that we gods and goddesses are at the mercy of fate, the same as mankind is. Only Atum is free from karma. In all of our years together ruling over Egypt, we never conceived a child. Please, my love, before destiny deals us any more misfortune, let us solidify our union by giving birth to a holy son or daughter. Then Osiris kissed her again, right there in the broken temple that they once lived in and ruled over Egypt from. Osiris impregnated Isis. Not much longer later, Set found where they were hiding and kicked down the door that hid them from his searching eyes. Over his shoulder was draped an unconscious Nephthys. He had claimed her once again as his. He then pointed his sword at the embracing Isis and Osiris and grew even angrier. I see that you have succeeded in bringing Osiris back to life, Set said. Then I guess I will have to send him to the underworld again. Set then, with Nephthys still hanging over his shoulder, lifted his bloody sword and charged Isis and Osiris. Osiris jumped up to do battle, so Set stopped his charge. You have no weapon to do battle with me. May no man or god ever claim that Set, the mighty pharaoh, is without honor. Honor? Osiris questioned. You murdered me by surprise last time. Yes, Set admitted, and I have matured since then. Set then lowered both his sword and Nephthys and raised his fists. Osiris raised his fists in turn. Before the fight began, Osiris told Isis to leave. Go, Isis. Go now and harbor our child in safety until he comes to proper age. Then let him make his own choice what to do with his life. If you run, Isis, Set said, I will find you and kill you too. Silence, villain, Osiris said before telling Isis to leave again. Go, Isis, tarry no longer, and fly to safety. With tears in her eyes and a new child growing in her womb, Isis used the very last bit of her magic to teleport away again. She could not travel very far after using what was left of her magical powers and would need much time before they replenished again. Yet she had enough power to remove herself from the temple. She knew very well what the outcome would be to the fight between Osiris and Set, and she was happy at least to not have to watch Osiris die again. Although she wanted nothing more than to spend eternity with Osiris, what was even more important than that was to make sure that the child in her womb would grow up healthy and strong. There was another silver lining besides the baby Osiris had given her. When she teleported outside the temple, she saw something that she had not seen in years. The sun was outside, and it was sending down its life-giving rays to all of Egypt. What Anubis had said was true. By bringing Osiris back to life, Amun-Ra was capable of escaping the underworld and placing the sun back in the sky. Praise all the gods that have helped me. I will raise this child to be just and true. She then started her long isolation into seclusion. Inside the temple, Nephthys watched Set kill Osiris a second time. With his bare hands, Set had pummeled his brother to death and sent him back to the land of the dead. He then grabbed Nephthys by the wrist and lugged her outside. By then, Isis had already left, but what distracted Set even more was that the sun had returned to the sky. Set looked up to the sun and smirked. Amun-Ra, I hope you are not foolish enough to get lost in the Duat again while looking for my dead brother. He then turned to Nephthys. My wayward wife who once loved me so, I offer the same advice to you that I just gave to Amun-Ra. You should refrain from necromancy. It would be most wise to leave the dead where they belong. Yet, I have my doubts that you will do as I say. He then gave his attention to the temple where Osiris's mummified corpse had been lying on the floor, beaten and pulverized. If scattering his remains didn't work last time, then I guess I will just have to bury the entire temple underneath the sand. Set then summoned a massive storm that devastated the temple and ordered the sands to swallow it whole. After they did, he ordered the suns to never let the temple remains rise back up, and they still cover it to this very day. Set went back to ruling as the pharaoh of Egypt. Nephthys reluctantly remained at his side, but no longer acted very much like a queen. She was mostly silent and still from that day onward. With the sun having returned back to the sky, the people of Egypt no longer had to suffer the endless winter that they had endured while Amun-Ra was away. His second life may have been extremely short, but the rebirth of Osiris had returned the sun to its proper place, and thus had saved humanity. When Osiris returned to the underworld, he was met by Anubis. "O former pharaoh," Anubis greeted him, "none has ever done what you have. To die and return to life, then come here again, is a first in all of history. Because of this great feat, you will wear the same crown in death that you wore in life." Osiris was crowned the king of the dead. He did not return to life a third time. After being promoted to Lord of the Underworld, a whole new set of responsibilities were given to Osiris, and he managed them all with effective diligence. Yet, the tales regarding the Duat, the Underworld, are for another time. There was still more to come regarding the reign of Set as pharaoh. Horus, the conqueror of Set. After the resurrection and second murder of Osiris, the pregnant Isis went into hiding. She traveled the desert alone for several days. Normally, when a god was conceived, they would be born almost immediately, but that was not to be the case for the child that was growing inside of Isis's body. Isis was very weak when she was impregnated by Osiris because she used up most of her energy and magical power trying to bring Osiris back to life. Spells of necromancy were the most taxing of all sorcery, and Isis needed to receive the proper rest. She also used her will as a goddess to postpone the birth of her child. She wanted to be absolutely sure that she was safe from Set before giving birth. While Isis was traveling with her unborn child, she found that receiving the proper rest was extremely difficult. She altered her appearance to a beggar while traveling through Egypt, just in case Set was to find her. The people of Egypt were not as welcome to her while she donned the guise of a poor woman. Every house she went to turned her away. She started to abhor the men and women of Egypt, but even then she retained the civility proper of a goddess. She observed the people who would not help her and saw that many of them were afflicted by one trouble or another. Isis used what little magical power that had returned to her to bless the same people who had turned her away. Without any of them knowing, she healed sick children and calmed the minds of the anxious. She caused husbands and wives to cease fighting, restored vitality to the elderly, among performing many other small miracles. Yet, since no one knew that she was casting white magic among the people she met, they still offered her no help. Spent of strength, Isis was starting to lose faith in herself. She needed a place to rest and regain her power. Even more, she needed a place to hide and raise her unborn child. Then, she was visited by Thoth, and he came to her bearing advice. "Your resilience is an inspiration, Isis," Thoth told her. "Your kind words fail to lift my spirit, Thoth. Though it pains me to admit this, I am in severe need of help. I have even asked the people of Egypt, but they have all slammed the door of assistance on my face. Fear not, Isis, and hear my words." Thoth told Isis that there was a hidden place in Egypt called Chemis. None except for Thoth knew of this special location. Even the other gods were ignorant to its whereabouts. When Isis asked how such a location could exist, he told her that he could not answer that. He was the god of wisdom, and as such, he had many secrets that were his to protect and harbor. He then told Isis where Chemis was hidden, and before bidding her farewell, gave her another piece of advice. "After your child is born, call out to me, Isis. I will help you to teach the boy what he will need to know to become a fine god." "Why do you assume my child to be a boy?" Isis asked. Thoth did not answer that question either. He simply placed a finger in front of his mouth, which was the symbol of silence, and then vanished. Isis hid in Chemis for many years. It was a small thicket of brush and greenery that was tucked away in the sands of Egypt. Isis recognized that it was a place of magic as soon as she stepped foot onto its soil. Chemis was more of a forest than anything else, and a forest could only grow in the desert if it was magical. Isis recovered her strength quickly after taking refuge in Chemis, and a few days later, she gave birth to her son, whom she named Horus. Horus was born with the body of a normal infant boy, but his head was that of a falcon, resembling Amun-Ra. Also similar to Amun-Ra, a plume of light rested on the crown of his skull. Isis recognized that his appearance was a powerfully good omen. She expected nothing less from the child who was the seed of Osiris. Unlike the other gods, Horus was not full-grown upon birth. Since Isis was so weakened when she conceived Horus, he had to develop into a full-grown man, the same as any mortal human would. Yet Horus was certainly a god. Both of his parents were gods, and his half-like animal appearance confirmed his status even more. Isis did not know what he was to become a god of, though. She wouldn't be able to learn that until Horus had grown up and decided what was to be his place in the world. That was another aspect that was different about Horus as opposed to the other gods. He had the right to choose his function. This worried Isis somewhat. What if, she wondered, he would choose a path that was unbecoming of a god? She promised herself that she would not allow such a thing to happen and trained the boy in all the forms of magic that she knew. She also enlisted the help of others to assist her with the raising of Horus. She summoned Thoth as he had told her to. He visited often and enlightened Horus unto many great secrets. Thoth even went to the extra effort of bringing some of the most powerful magicians of Egypt into Chemis. These mages may have been mortals, but many of them were wise men and women. These saintly magi trained Horus and initiated him into many of the mysteries. One of Thoth's magicians was selected by Isis to perform a task of great danger and of the utmost importance. She asked the mage to boldly devise a scheme or spell that could get him into the palace of Set. Once there, the magician was to pass a message along to her sister, Nephthys. The message that Isis asked to be passed along would tell Nephthys the location of Chemis. Isis knew that Nephthys would leap at the opportunity to help raise the son of Osiris, as well as take any opportunity she could to escape from Set. The magician told Isis that he would execute her task post-haste. Not much longer, and Nephthys arrived in Chemis. Nephthys assured Isis that Set's servants had not followed her, but she couldn't be so sure that Set would remain ignorant of Chemis's location forever. On some occasions, snakes would slither into Chemis, and they always seemed to be searching for Horus. As he was growing up, he was attacked and bitten by many snakes, but Isis healed him every time. When he had grown old enough and mastered the art of healing for himself, he no longer needed his mother to cure him of the snake's venoms. Then, as he grew older still, the snakes didn't bite him anymore. Every time one slithered up to him, he struck it dead on the spot. As time carried on and Horus grew older, he continued to be trained by Thoth, Nephthys, and Isis. Along with the magicians that Thoth brought to train the growing boy, Thoth eventually started to bring swordsmen, archers, hunters, and other warriors. None except Thoth knew what Horus's godly function was to be, and whenever anyone asked him, he would only give the sign of silence as his answer. Yet, there was a clue hidden in the methods that Thoth had elected to train Horus with. Thoth made it very clear to Horus, Isis, and Nephthys that no matter what Horus decided to do when he reached full maturity, he would need to be skilled with a sword. The years went by. By the time Horus had grown to the age of a young man, or godling, he was brimming with confidence. He was rippling with muscle and had become a more efficient warrior than all of his teachers and trainers combined. He also grew to despise Set. Isis told him of how Set had killed his father twice and forced her into hiding. Nephthys also always assumed that the snakes that attacked Horus as he was growing up were probably the agents of Set. These stories and warnings of Set left a heavy impression on Horus. He had been sheltered in Chemis for his entire life, and not a day went by when he did not hear about how Set was the root cause for his entrapment in the magical forest of Chemis. There were many days where he longed to exit Chemis and explore the rest of Egypt, but he never was allowed to because of the looming threat named Set that hung over his head ever since before he was born. One day, while Thoth was visiting, Horus sat everyone down and told them what he intended to do with the life that he had been given. He gathered Thoth, Nephthys, and his mother around a campfire. The element of fire was sacred to all the gods, and they lit one, not for the scenery or ambience, but to signal that whatever Horus had to say would end one arc of the world's evolution, and then begin the next phase. Before I confess my decision, I must thank all of you. I understand how much my upbringing must have been a burden, and I am beyond grateful for all you have done. Yet, I have thought long and hard about my future and status as a god. I have now made a determination, and I will see it through, no matter what the cost may be. He then looked to the heavens above as if he was silently speaking to Amun-Ra, before verbalizing what he had to say. The plume of light that was always attached to the crown of Horus's head flared exactly the same as the sun in the sky. He then looked back to Isis, Nephthys, and Thoth. I am going to kill Set. I will reclaim the throne that was stolen from my father, Osiris. This is what I choose to do with the life I have been given. Isis and Nephthys began to debate with Horus. On one hand, they all wanted Set to die. On the other, killing Set was almost an impossible task. Set was pure destruction, and none knew how to conquer the force of destruction. I can't guarantee he will succeed, Thoth interjected. but I can guarantee that he can succeed." Thoth then explained further. Thoth, the wisest of the gods, knew something about Horus that he didn't even know about himself. "Horus, as we have told you before, your appearance resembles that of Amun-Ra. This is no coincidence. Coincidence is an illusion. All the gods and goddesses are the children of Amun-Ra, who is the child of Atum. The bead of light that rests upon the crown of your head is proof that you are a direct descendant of the king of the gods. You are a reflection of the power of order that has always been battling against the forces of chaos." Horus said nothing when he heard Thoth's wise words of truth. He had heard enough of Thoth's speeches while growing up to know that silently listening was the best course of action at all times. "Listen well, Horus. Set is a god of chaos, destruction, storms, and war. You, Horus, are a god of order, creation, peace, and restoration. Yet, there is something misunderstood about the relationship between war and restoration." There was a pause amongst the small congregation of gods. Everyone present knew that the word of Thoth was really the word of Atum. He had often given the sign of silence whenever someone asked about Horus, and now that Horus had come to a decision, the wisdom of Thoth was ready to speak. "War," Thoth said, then paused. He wanted the weight of the word to sink in. "War is deliberate destruction. Set's storms rape the land and crumble the structures made by man, but they do so indiscriminately. A war is different. A war is always aimed at a specific people or location. While a storm is indiscriminate, a war is deliberate. Both of these manifestations of storms and war serve the same purpose. They aim to remove something. Set's power of removal is necessary. If there was only growth and creation, then there would eventually be no more room for anything new to develop. For anything new to come down from Atum, old things that no longer serve their purpose must be destroyed. That is why the power of the storm was given to Set. Warfare was not originally part of Set's powers. After mankind had been born and after Set had become too angry and jealous of Osiris, the art of warfare was spawned into this world. Yet, as hard as this is to do, Set can't be blamed for this. The weight he has carried as a god of destruction is no easy burden to bear. This may sound brutish, but when it comes to Set being a god of destruction, someone had to do it, and the severe responsibility was given to Set. To be honest, I'm amazed that he lasted as long as he did before he spiraled away from the purpose that was bestowed upon him. Nephthys, Isis, and Horus continued to listen. They hung onto and pondered every single word that Thoth was saying to them. When Set first murdered Osiris, he did so discriminately. That was the start of his fall. Osiris had not outlived his usefulness yet. Set removed him before his time. When the chance came for his child to be born, the usefulness of Osiris was passed down to his child. Osiris is in the underworld now and serving a very important purpose. However, the purpose that he left behind on the mortal plane when Set killed him is now your purpose, Horus, if you choose to accept it. Osiris once helped to grow the corn and vines that give food to the humans and animals of Egypt. Whenever the food ran low, Osiris would restore the food. By giving the world food, Osiris was also restoring vitality and life to all of Egypt. This was the balance that had been decided upon by Atum and Apep. Set would remove what was no longer needed, and Osiris would restore what still served a useful purpose. After Osiris died, the people started to forget about the restoration of Osiris and themselves. That is why Egypt has begun to fall into crime and warfare. That is why the people have fallen out of balance with nature. If the balance of nature is not restored, then it will only get worse from here. There will be more wars and less restoration from the destruction they bring. You are Set's equal in almost every measure. Where Set is a god of destruction, or to word it differently, unjust war, you, Horus, are the god of restoration, or just war. Consider the sword of Set to be one that strikes down the innocent, and consider the sword of Horus to be one that strikes down the wicked. And know that both are equally as important to maintaining the balance of the cosmos. Even after giving his explanation, Thoth's words still miffed Isis, Nephthys, and Horus. They all had many questions for him, and he no longer gave them the sign of silence as an answer. He repeated that Set had lost his way. Set's original function was to destroy whatever had become redundant in the physical world. His destruction was a necessity for maintaining the order of Ma'at that was established by Atum. Yet his vices had overtaken his virtues, and Atum had decided that another god equal to his power was needed. Horus was born to restore balance to the world that had been tipped too far off course by Set's mistake. Set had become out of balance, and the rest of the world had followed his path. Meanwhile, Osiris was no longer around to restore the balance. It was very wise of you to select the path that you have chosen, Horus, Thoth told him. You could have used your gift of life to take any direction, and you have chosen correctly. Set is a god that removes what is no longer needed, Nephthys said after she began to understand the truth of Thoth's words. Now that Set has made too many errors, he is no longer needed. But before Set can be removed, Isis finished her sister's thoughts. A new god of removal is needed. Only a god can remove a god. Exactly, Thoth said. But know this, Horus. You do not just have the power to destroy like Set. You also have the power to restore like Osiris. That is why your godly power was always unknown to you and your mother. That is why we had to wait for you to make a decision on your own. That is why you have chosen to remove Set and restore the throne of Egypt. If you follow through on the determination you have decided upon, you will be invoking both the power of destruction and restoration. Isis and Nephthys were reluctant to let Horus embark on his chosen path, but they knew that he had to go. He had made his decision, and there was nothing else for them to teach him. They offered to use their magic to teleport him directly to the palace of Set, but he turned down their offer. I will walk there. I have lived in Chemis my entire life, and if I am to become the pharaoh of Egypt, then I must become better yet acquainted with the suns. And there is another reason I must walk there instead of using your magic or mine. Before going into battle with Set, I would like to absorb as much of the light from Amun-Ra that I can. Isis and Nephthys understood Horus's words. They both gave him a kiss and set him on his way. Do you know how this battle will end? Isis asked Thoth. For his answer, he only gave the sign of silence. Several weeks later, Horus had finished his trek and stood before the palace of Set. Whereas the rest of Egypt was coated by the sun of Amun-Ra, Set's abode almost appeared as an entirely separate realm of reality. Dark clouds lingered above the colossal palace. Thunderbolts and lightning cracked the sky. Gales of wind kicked up the sands and spun them into a typhoon. Within the atmosphere that surrounded Set's dark palace, there was an internal fear being carried by the winds. Horus felt his knees begin to buckle and the pit of his stomach turn upside down. He only had his sword, but even that started to slip from his fingers as he slowly walked closer and closer to Set's stormy lair. This is my purpose. I must kill the god that has fallen from grace. I must avenge my father Osiris. I must win back the throne and restore the balance to nature. This fear that is trying to scare me will not win. Even if I die while battling Set, I will drag him down into the underworld with me. As he got closer to Set's palace, the storm increased in intensity. The sandstorm started to bombard his flesh and feathers alike. Lightning bolts began to strike down the ground that he walked on. A mixture of heavy rain, sleet, and hail rained down upon him. The ferocity of the storm was threatening to knock him off his feet and bury him underneath the sand. His knees buckled more as his eyes were blinded by the violent elements. The longer it takes me to get there, the stronger the storm becomes. If that be the case, then I have to get there faster. Horus prayed one final prayer to Isis, Nephthys, Thoth, and Amun-Ra. Then he began to charge with all his strength through the storm and headed straight for the palace. From inside Set's palace, the dark pharaoh's servants saw a light coming closer to them. They did not know who Horus was and never assumed that the light they saw rushing through the storm was actually a god, the son of Osiris and Isis. They informed Set that something odd was approaching his lair, and then stepped outside to investigate what the moving source of light was. Set's warriors blocked the bridge that led inside the palace. They waited for the light to get closer before raising their weapons. When they saw that the moving light had the body of a man but the head of a bird, they began to panic. "It is Amun-Ra himself. Show reverence and kneel before the king of the gods." When Horus reached the foot of Set's palace, he saw the servants of his sworn enemy bowing before him. They remained on bended knee before him and shouted a showing of reverence in unison. "Hail Amun-Ra, the king of the gods." Horus did not bother to correct them. He simply said, "Out of my way." They all rose and parted, giving Horus clear and easy access inside of Set's palace. Horus walked past them, clenched his sword tightly in his hand, and opened the palace door. When he walked inside, he saw that the walls and floor of the palace were dilapidated and falling apart. Large cracks lined the floor while stones were falling away from the walls. The ceiling above was leaking rainwater in. An overwhelming stench of mold filled Horus's nostrils. Set, the god and pharaoh, had allowed his home to fall apart. It was only another sign that what Thoth had told him had been accurate. Set had lost his way. First, his home would crumble, but remain in the world instead of being removed. Then the rest of Egypt would follow the path of the pharaoh and become desolate and barren. He saw something else, something that was far more prevalent and ironic. Set, the deity whose head was a combination of several different beasts, was bowing in the middle of the palace floor, all alone. "Hail Amun-Ra. Hail the king of the gods." Set then lifted his head after honoring who he thought was Amun-Ra. When he saw the figure before him, he raised a brow of confusion. "You are not Amun-Ra. What trickery is this?" Horus began to approach him and readied his sword for battle. "No, I am not Amun-Ra. I am the son of Isis and the brother that you have murdered, Osiris. My name is Horus, and I have come to kill you, Set." Set then leaped to his feet and unsheathed his own sword. "I was wondering when you would finally show up, son of Osiris," Set said as he began to walk along the long hall to meet his enemy. "I even started to think that maybe Isis had died before giving birth to you. Yet here you are, and I can see that you are just as stupid as your father was." "Shut your vile mouth, Set," Horus said as the two gods were getting closer to each other. Set chuckled when he saw Horus's anger. He then mocked the youngest of the gods. "So my nephew thinks he can kill me. Then come, Horus, son of Osiris. Come and die like your father." Set then raised his sword and his voice. "My servants, listen and obey my command. This battle is to be between me and Horus. None of you may interfere." Set then looked directly at Horus. "Come at me and die." Horus was more than ready to engage in battle, but had one final question to ask Set. "Tell me one thing, Set. If Amun-Ra did come to visit you, what would you have done?" "I would have bowed down before him, honored him, and then killed him." There was nothing else to say. The two gods met in the center of the palace, and then their swords clashed. Almost immediately, Set went on the defensive. He had never been challenged before by someone who could equal his might, and the strength of Horus shocked him. Set reeled back while blocking all of Horus's blows without being able to sneak in a single swipe of his own sword. Horus continued to smash his blade up and down, left and right, while desperately trying to slice Set's head off of his body. He finally managed to unleash a blow that was too devastating for Set to defend against, and the Dark Pharaoh fell down to his knees while holding out his sword as if it were a shield. Horus then swung his sword down again and broke the weapon of Set right in half. His power is tremendous. Set fought as Horus was humbling him. Horus then lifted his sword back up and went to remove Set's head, but Set scattered away and dodged the decisive blow. Horus leaped up high into the air, pointed his weapon at Set, and plunged down like a comet, yet he missed Set again. Even worse, after he landed, Horus realized that his weapon was stolen from him. Not only did Set dodge his attack, but he had managed to steal Horus's sword in the process. How did he do that? Horus thought as he ducked underneath his own sword that Set had stolen from him. The legends were true. Set is a warrior king. Outside the halls of Set's palace, a storm began to fester throughout all of Egypt. The skies grew dark and violent. Yet, there was a light shining down through the darkness. The elements were following the battle between Set and Horus. Each time Set gained an advantage in the fight, the storm grew more violent. Every time Horus began to gain an advantage, the light began to overpower the storm. From the forest of Chemis, Thoth, Isis, and Nephthys watched the struggle looming in the sky above them. From the depths of the underworld, Osiris and Anubis could feel the earth above quake and tremble. From the holy ship of Amun-Ra, the king of the gods watched the storm brew below him. The light exuding from his ship would either dim or grow brighter, and Amun-Ra knew why his cycle of light was being challenged so much. Though I would prefer to interfere, this is not my battle. If Set wins and my ship's light grows weak, then that is the will of nature. If Horus wins and my light eradicates the darkness, then that is the will of nature. Although I root for Horus, none may interfere between the fight of Set and Horus. It is the most important contest that this world will ever know, and it must be settled one-on-one. Inside the palace, Set had gone on the offensive. Horus was without a weapon and had been reduced to dodging every strike Set tried to cripple him with. He managed to connect with a few punches and kicks, but none of his strikes were capable of rattling Set. He wasn't able to hit Set with his full power while trying to avoid the swipes of his sword at the same time. If I don't make a brazen move and regain the advantage, Set will surely kill me. Horus took a daring chance when the sword edged closer to him again. He swatted the side of the blade away with the palm of his hand and then grabbed onto Set's throat. Set choked and staggered while caught in Horus's iron-like grasp. His grip is unbreakable. With Set's throat in one hand, Horus used the other hand to bash his fist into Set's face over and over. Set wavered like a defenseless puppet, but then managed to use what was left of his strength before it had completely seeped out of him. He swung the sword again, and when he did, Horus's left arm was cut clean off of his body. Horus released Set and screamed to the heavens. Set wanted to kill him then and there, but was too winded from being choked to continue his assault right away. He took a brief interlude to regain his wits, and then swung the sword at Horus again. Horus was severely wounded, but was still a mighty god. Even while missing an arm and racked with immobilizing pain, he managed to kick his nemesis in the gut before Set could deliver the killing blow. When Set fell back, the sword dropped away from his hand. Horus picked it up and stabbed down, but Set rolled out of the way, leaving the sword to clank against the marble floor. Set then wrapped around Horus and, from behind, placed a chokehold onto his nephew. No, he is too fast. Horus started to black out, while Set strangled the life away from him. He could hear Set chuckling while he held tightly onto Horus. Horus tried to struggle and break free, but Set only squeezed tighter with every move Horus made. He then let go of his sword, but not because he had lost the battle. He needed a free arm to pry Set's grip away from his throat. The two continued to struggle more, Horus's one arm against both of Set's. When Set began to feel his fingers slip, he knew Horus would break the stranglehold and decided to let go so he could grab the sword that Horus had given up. Set lunged for the sword, but when he went to pick it up, he couldn't. Horus had stepped on the sword after he dropped it, and by the time Set realized that fact, Horus slugged him right in the face with his only arm. The punch lifted Set up into the air, sent his body into a tailspin, and when he landed, his body rolled along the palace floor as if he were a pebble that had been tossed off a mountain. Horus then picked up the sword and charged at Set. Set scrambled to his feet, dazed, and attempted to sidestep Horus's charge. He only half succeeded. Set did manage to move out of the way, but he did not do so unscathed. Set didn't feel the pain right away, but when he saw that Horus had cut off his right arm, he bellowed a cry of pain that all of Egypt heard. Both Set and Horus were missing an arm. Blood ran down both of their faces. Neither had any energy left to continue fighting at such a pace. Neither had the vitality to continue challenging the other. Neither had the mental clarity to plan their next move. Both were spent, but the fight between them and the struggle between the light and the dark outside of the palace could not end until one had emerged as the undisputed winner. Horus knew that he was going to have to take a chance, so he charged Set again. Set saw Horus rushing with the sword. Without planning, Set charged back at him. Both of the gods were past the point of strategizing. The fight had devolved into force versus force and will versus will. Horus swung the sword, but Set caught his arm and then twirled Horus off of his feet and hurled him into the palace wall. The sword spun in the air, and Set snatched it out of the sky before rushing tip-first directly at Horus. Horus was flat against the wall, but not without his own defenses. He curled up his only hand into a fist and threw out a punch that was guided by faith. His mighty blow made contact with the sword, smashed through the steel, and then cracked Set directly between the eyes. Set fell flat on his back. Horus knew that was his opportunity to end the battle, but his strength had left him. He dropped to both knees, tried to get back up, but dropped down again. What can I do? How can this battle be ended? While Horus was trying to conceive of a plan, Set pounced back up and tackled Horus down to the floor. He mounted atop Horus and began to smash his fist against Horus's beak, breaking it in the process. Horus started to black out again. Blood covered his eyes, and the pain was sucking out what little will he had left. Set is too powerful a fighter. I can't remove destruction with destruction. There must be another way. Set continued to pummel Horus to a pulp, screaming maniacally at him as he was doing so. Die, Horus. Die like your father. Die the same way I will kill Isis when I find her. Die like all of the mortal fools who are at the mercy of my storms. Serve your purpose and die. You were born to be killed by me and solidify my status as the true king of the gods. Die, die, die. Die and take the damned light with you to the Duat. The light. The light. Those words entered Horus's mind, and he understood how to truly defeat Set. Horus stopped fighting back as Set rained down blow after blow upon him. He focused all of his energy and thoughts on the concept of light. Then, the bulb of light that was always shining atop of Horus's head, ever since he was born, grew brighter and brighter. What is this? Set said as he started to be blinded by the light. He released Horus and started to back away from him. Horus was too physically weak to stand, but his light continued to grow brighter and brighter. The entire palace began to glow as one solid white pillar. The storm that was ravaging Egypt outside the palace began to subside, and the light from Amun-Ra's ship started to shatter the darkness and touch the sands of Egypt. "I feel my strength returning." Horus then slowly stood up as the light was pouring out of him. "Set," Horus spoke. "If I cannot kill you, then I will have to blind you into submission. The light can restore all, including my wounds and your eras of judgment." While glowing in the radiant light, the cells of Horus's body began to vibrate. The stump that was his severed arm twitched, quivered, and then his arm grew back. The rest of his wounds then began to recover, and Horus quickly returned to a pristine and godly condition. Set didn't see any of this. He had been blinded by the light. "Stop it. Turn the light off." "No, Set. I will not dim this light until you admit defeat. Announce to all of Egypt that you are giving up the throne. If you do, I will show you mercy." "Never," Set shouted. "Then you will be blinded for eternity," Horus told him. Set writhed and cried while being drowned by the light. He tried to resist but knew that Horus's will had bested him. "I will never admit defeat. I would rather die than submit." Set used his last ounce of power to summon a last bolt of lightning. The storm outside of the palace entirely dissipated. All of the violent energy that was contained in his violent storm collected into one final bolt of lightning that blasted through the roof of the palace and struck Set. He was vaporized upon impact and sent to the underworld below. Horus had won. He had conquered Set. Many different things happened after Horus was declared the winner. He announced to all of Egypt that Set had been removed from the throne and crowned himself as the new pharaoh. Yet, Horus's reign was short-lived. He decided to hand over the crown to the mortals. The gods would continue to watch over the men and women of Egypt, but Horus had recognized that the time had come for the people to learn to govern themselves. Isis and Nephthys rejoined with Horus after Set was slain. The three of them buried Set's temple underneath the sand and then went about helping the mortals of Egypt. There was much work to be done after Set's long reign as pharaoh, and the cults of Osiris were founded under the guidance of Isis and Nephthys. Isis and Nephthys were both made the patron goddesses of Osiris's cults and were honored with faith and fealty from then on. Horus would remain as the defender of justice. Whenever his light of truth was needed, Horus would charge into action and defend the innocent from the wicked. Along with being honored as a god of light, Horus also became known as a god of restoration. He later fell in love with the goddess Hathor and conceived 4 children with her. Their names were Hapi, Inseti, Kebesenuef, and Duamutef. When Set killed himself and was sent to the underworld, Anubis greeted him. In the duat, Anubis was far more powerful than Set, and Set never raised a hand of rebellion against Anubis. Anubis led Set to Osiris, who had become king of the underworld. Osiris forgave Set for his misgivings and told him that if he never stepped out of line, then Set would be given a special temple in the underworld. From his temple, Set would continue to rule the storms and remove whatever had become redundant in the world of man. Set reluctantly agreed to Osiris's terms and hid away in his temple, where he never had to see the light of Horus or Amun-Ra ever again. Horus had won. He restored balance to nature. This victory opened up a new path in the evolution of the world. For the first time since the gods had descended down to Egypt, the future of mankind's fate was given directly to the humans themselves. Anubis and the Underworld. When mankind was still young in their evolution and development, Anubis was the lord of the dead and the duat, the underworld where souls journeyed after death. As mankind developed and their population grew, Anubis found that guiding every soul into duat was becoming more and more difficult to do all on his own. Hathor assisted him when she could, but even with her help, there were too many souls for one deity to manage. Anubis had a greater responsibility than just guiding the souls of the dead into Duat. He also made sure that their bodies were preserved properly. Anubis was the god of embalming and was solely responsible for the process of mummification. When Anubis could not be present to embalm and mummify a body on his own, his loyal and holy priests donned a mask of his image and performed the role in his stead. When Osiris was resurrected and then slain by Set again, he was elevated even higher in status than what Amun-Ra had originally bestowed upon him. None had ever returned from the Duat, and Osiris's rebirth had given him a certain level of understanding about the relationship between life and death that was alien knowledge, even to many of the gods. Because of this, Amun-Ra established Osiris as the Lord of the Dead. Anubis did not protest this. Being a wise god in his own right, he knew not to challenge the delicate balance between order and chaos that the old gods were always fighting to uphold. Anubis also recognized that a favor had been done upon him when Osiris was transformed into the god of both life and death. With Osiris being placed in charge of the underworld, Anubis could give more focus to embalming the bodies of the dead, as well as guiding their souls to the underworld. Being wise and diligent, Anubis did not simply fritter away with the extra time he was given. Every night, Amun-Ra rowed the ship of the sun into the underworld. Although some of the wiser mortals recognized the correspondence, most were unaware that the daily fading of the sun was parallel to their own lives. When the sun went down to the underworld, it was considered to be the death of the day. When the sun rose in the morning, it was born again. This natural cycle of night and day was also symbolic of the life and death of an earthbound mortal. Yet, if a person was reborn, they did not return to the earth. When a mortal soul had died, it was led by Anubis into the Duat. If the person's soul had lived a life that was just, then they were to be reborn in the Duat and elevated onto a higher plane of existence, which was free of pain, sorrow, and confusion. There were many steps one had to go through in order to reach a second life, and the final of these steps was when the soul came face to face with Osiris, the Redeemer. Anubis was guiding the souls of the dead along the path of Osiris so that they may be reborn in the Duat, and by doing so could elevate their souls and consciousness onto wonders far beyond the sphere of any material plane. If a person's soul could pass all the tests successfully and complete the path of Osiris, then they would be given a key into the Duat and learn the great mysteries of life and death, order and chaos. After Osiris had been given presidency over the land of the dead, and Anubis was given more free time, he spoke to Amun-Ra about a matter that had bothered him. Normally, only the pharaohs, their family, and the wisest mortals were given advice on what to do when their soul reached the underworld. Anubis was only the guide of the dead, and he left every soul to figure out on their own how to properly pass the tests on the path to Osiris. Anubis proposed to Amun-Ra that the reward of being reborn in the Duat should not just be for noblemen, but commoners as well. Seeing that humanity had developed very far, Amun-Ra agreed and told Anubis that he may give the humans advice on what to do after they died, but he still was not allowed to assist any human in passing the tests that were strewn along the path to Osiris. Anubis agreed to Amun-Ra's terms and helped a mortal man to write a book called the Book of the Dead, which is also called the Book of Life. This book acted as a manual on how to complete the path of Osiris. First, the person who died must receive a proper burial. They were to have all their organs removed, except the heart. The heart was the center of the soul, and it would be needed when going through the path of Osiris. They were then to have their body mummified so that, if the soul could appease Osiris, they could rejoin their body in the Duat. If the proper funerary proceedings were done, then Anubis would guide their soul to the underworld, and the several trials of immortality would begin. The soul would have to overcome the several agents of chaos that lingered in the underworld. If the soul did not show fear and continued to bravely follow Anubis, then they would eventually reach the Hall of Judgment. In the Hall of Judgment, they would need to speak with 42 individual gods who acted as judges. Before each god, the soul would have to perform a negative confession. These negative confessions were an admittance of not having performed a certain sin. Robbery, adultery, murder, deceit, slander, ignoring the truth are only some of the negative confessions that each soul would have to pontificate before a judge. If every judge was properly appeased, then Anubis would continue to guide the soul closer to Osiris. If they had failed to please even one of the judges, then Anubis would leave the soul on their own to wander the underworld and face the agents of chaos alone. After all 42 of the negative confessions were decreed, Anubis would bring the wayward soul into the Hall of Two Truths, where the most important test would take place. Maat, the goddess who was the bride of Thoth, was the embodiment of all that was just, true, and wise. There were 42 aspects to Maat, and those aspects were the negative confessions. The entire path of Osiris was actually the path of Maat. Inside the Hall of Two Truths, the heart of the soul was weighed against the feather of Maat, which was her symbol for truth and purity. Anubis himself would pull the heart out of the soul and place it on the scale along with Maat's feather. If the heart was lighter than the feather, then Anubis would send the soul to Amun-Ra, who would pick them up during his nightly voyage into the underworld, and Amun-Ra would place the soul before Osiris, so that they may be redeemed by him. Then they were allowed to be born again in the Duat, and suffer no more earthly troubles evermore. Yet, if Anubis saw that the heart weighed more than the feather, then Anubis would send them off to meet Ammit, the external extension of Apep that forever lived in the underworld. Ammit would then eat the soul, and they would be erased from all existence. Anubis may have been associated with death, but he was not an agent of chaos. In many ways, Anubis had given humanity an extra tool with the Book of the Dead. Anubis wanted as many souls as possible to complete the path of Osiris and reach immortality in the Duat. Although Anubis would be demonized by the ignorant mortals, there was never a single era in all of history where he was not working to bring humanity closer to Maat and Osiris, and thus bring them closer to immortality and eternal bliss. Despite the inaccurate labels that were given to Anubis by many ignorant men and women, he was a silent savior to mankind, as well as a soldier working under the command of the power of order. The 7-year famine, Knemu of the Nile. There was once a king named Djoser, who was in charge of governing all of southern Egypt. Djoser was a modest man and well-learned in all matters of politics and civics. He had spent many years developing the skills and knowledge that he needed to master to become an acceptable leader of his people. Although Djoser did not do it on purpose, the one area of study that he had not mastered was knowledge of the gods. He had spent so much time and effort trying to be a logical and fair man that he had skimped on learning about Thoth, Amun-Ra, Isis, and all the others. Of course, he knew who the gods were and were familiar with their more famous exploits, but Djoser was not intimate with the gods of Egypt. He didn't see the point of learning more about them. According to Djoser, the problems of man were for men to solve, and it was better to leave the gods to their own business. During Djoser's reign as king, the southern sphere of Egypt suffered a debilitating drought. For the first year, Djoser didn't worry about the drought. Droughts had happened before, but they never lasted for very long. This drought was far more stubborn than the others that Djoser had seen before, though. It had lasted for 7 long years. This terribly long drought had caused the Nile to almost dry up entirely. Usually, the Nile would become inundated and give water to southern Egypt, but it had not done so for 7 years, and was taking a heavy toll on both the land and people. The vegetation and grains were not getting the water they needed, and the food was running dreadfully short. Children and the elderly alike were dying of starvation. Crimes of robbery and violence began to escalate. Neighbors were killing each other to scavenge whatever morsel of food they could find. Many people were trying to leave the area, but they were too weak and hungry to make an exodus. Djoser ran through several plans and strategies to fix this problem, but none of his schemes worked. Everything he tried to do to appease and help his people was a moot effort. What the people needed was for the Nile to become inundated and return the water to the crops. 7 years is far too long for a land to go without receiving any water, and Djoser was becoming desperate to hear news of the Nile becoming inundated. All of his viziers, vassals, and advisors had failed him. His entire court was at a loss for what to do. Djoser had run out of logical options and finally decided to appeal to the gods for help. He could not do that on his own, though, since his faith was weak. To overcome this, he called for a priest named Imhotep. Imhotep's reputation for being a man close to the gods was known far and wide. King Djoser could only hope that where he had failed to hear the call and command of the gods, the priest Imhotep would learn what the gods wanted and then set everything right. "Welcome, Imhotep." The king greeted the priest. Imhotep greeted the king in return and then asked why he had been summoned. Imhotep was in the middle of praying to Thoth when he was summoned by the king, and although Imhotep never turned down a person who was in need of help, he greatly wanted to return to trying to communicate with Thoth. "As you must be aware, Imhotep, we are all suffering from a great drought. For 7 years now, the Nile has not inundated. If this lasts for much longer, then I fear that soon there will be no more people left in southern Egypt." All of this Imhotep was well aware of. The drought had not bothered him as much as it had bothered everyone else. Imhotep knew that if the gods would will it, water would come. If the gods would not will it, then no water would come. Imhotep was far too wise to question the will of the gods. "I wonder something about this drought. Where has Hapi, the god of the Nile, run off to? Tell me, Imhotep, why Hapi, the bringer of vegetation, has forsaken us so. Have we done something to anger Hapi? Has he been wounded? Why has he stopped to bring water to the Nile? Why has Hapi stopped bringing water to the people of Egypt?" Imhotep grew very disappointed as he listened to Djoser's spiel. He was aware that Djoser was not the most educated man when it came to the topics of the gods, but everything he was saying was beyond ignorant. According to Imhotep, the words of King Djoser were nothing more than the misgivings of a fool. "My king, great Djoser." Imhotep began to politely address his lord before giving him the harsh news. "Every word you speak is sure to only upset the gods more. Hapi is not what you think him to be. Hapi is not even a he, nor is Hapi a she. First of all, Hapi is androgynous. Second, Hapi does help to raise the waters of the Nile, but Hapi does not open the gate and bring the water to the land all alone. You are forgetting about the god Khnemu, also known as Khnum." Djoser became embarrassed and flustered. He had never heard of such a god. He asked Imhotep to give him more information about Hapi and Khnemu. Imhotep told him that the procession of fertility had to pass through many different phases before food would grow from the ground, and Hapi was only one of the gods of fertility and the Nile. Without honoring Khnemu, only half of the proper worshipping was being done. "I pay homage to both Hapi and Khnemu, along with many other gods, every single day. I would suggest that you do the same, my king," Imhotep told Djoser. King Djoser did not know how to properly honor the gods, though. He was only a king of southern Egypt, not a pharaoh of the entire nation, and had always assumed that praising the gods were for the pharaohs, priests, and serfs. "I ask for your help in this matter, Imhotep," Djoser began to beg. "I admit my errors and will get to work to correct them. But my people can't wait for water any longer. Is there anything you can do to appease both Hapi and Khnemu? Is there any way you can get them to bring the water from the Nile into the soil and return food to southern Egypt?" Imhotep said that he would go to the island of Elephantine, where Khnemu had a temple dedicated to his honor, and offer a dedicated prayer. While I am there, I will attempt to commune with Khnemu on your behalf. Yet I do not know how Khnemu will respond when I ask for his help." Djoser told Imhotep that he would make him a rich man if he could convince Khnemu to end the drought. Imhotep didn't care about becoming a rich man. He was a friend of the gods and had little desire for material wants. Even so, he knew the people of Egypt needed water and began his venture to the island of Elephantine. Djoser offered him men and supplies for his journey, but Imhotep turned down his offer of assistance. "The gods will help me to reach Elephantine far more than anything you can give me." If most men were to speak to a king in such a way, they would have surely met a swift death. Yet Djoser needed Imhotep to succeed and let him leave the palace without any hassle. Imhotep traveled by camel to the island of Elephantine. It was a long journey, but Imhotep stopped when he grew tired and prayed when his heart started to waver in faith. His rations of food and water were scarce, but Imhotep was proficient at fasting and did not need to supply his body the same way most other people did. When Imhotep arrived in Elephantine, he quickly discovered where Khnemu was worshipped. The people who adored Khnemu had dedicated a temple to the god and performed prayers of devotion there on a regular basis. Imhotep asked the people if he could sleep in the temple undisturbed for one night. Since he was a priest, no one saw any reason to refuse his request. For one single night, Imhotep was left alone in the temple of Khnemu, undisturbed. Imhotep was not sure if only one single night of prayer would be enough time to meet Khnemu, but he was determined to try. In private isolation, Imhotep performed a ritual dedicated to Khnemu. He began with an exercise to increase his focus and relaxation. He then performed a spell of banishment just in case any evil spirit had invaded the temple. He then entered a deep state of meditation that lasted for several hours. He then gathered up all of his sacrificial offerings and placed them on the altar. He gave up what little rations of food he had to Khnemu, along with burnt offerings and various oils. He then prayed to Isis, Nephthys, Shu, Geb, Hapi, Osiris, and Horus. He then entered into meditation again for several more hours, but no god manifested before him. Distraught but not defeated, Imhotep still had one final divine technique he had not tried yet. "All I can do now is go to sleep and hope that Khnemu will speak to me in my dreams." Imhotep offered a final prayer to the gods for the evening and then laid down to rest before the altar that was filled with his offerings. After such a long journey and complicated prayer, he had expended most of his energy. Sleep came quickly that night for Imhotep. Sleep was not the same for Imhotep as it was for other men. He had been trained in the great mysteries of the gods and knew how to walk in a different world when he went to sleep. His sleep was a combination between rest and meditation, and in the past he had spoken to more than one god while performing this sacred rite. As he drifted in a different world while in the temple of Khnemu, his spell worked. Imhotep shifted from one form to another while asleep, and his spirit rose out of his body. He stood over his physical body on the temple floor and watched himself slumber peacefully. Then, while in an astral form, he began to explore the temple further. He then heard a voice. "Hello, Imhotep." Imhotep's spiritual body looked back to the altar and saw the god Khnemu hovering above it. He had the body of a man, but the head of a ram with horns that stuck out like two great pillars. Imhotep's soul bowed before Khnemu and offered thanks for being honored the privilege of getting to see the god's true form. "Why did you travel so far to my temple?" Khnemu asked Imhotep. Imhotep explained the plight of the people who lived in southern Egypt. He apologized on behalf of King Djoser and asked if Khnemu could help bring water to the land. "You are most devout and loyal, Imhotep. There is confusion in your king, though. I have not forsaken the people of southern Egypt. They have forsaken me. Once, long ago, there was a temple in southern Egypt that was dedicated in my honor, but it was destroyed by one of Set's storms. No one ever repaired my temple, so your land has grown barren. This is how the gods work with mankind, Imhotep. If you honor us, we honor you. If you ignore us, we ignore you." Imhotep understood exactly what Khnemu was telling him. To the laymen of Egypt, this revelation may have been shocking to hear, but Imhotep was well aware of the reciprocal relationship between humans and nature. Imhotep asked Khnemu many other questions that night. Khnemu enjoyed speaking with Imhotep and revealed many of the secrets of the gods to him. Yet Khnemu also told him that he was not to tell any other mortal about these great secrets. If mortal men and women want to learn the truth about the gods, they must ask us themselves and put in the same effort that you have. Imhotep understood that as well, and never shared any of the deeper knowledge that Khnemu had shared with him. Imhotep returned to Djoser and told him about how there was once a temple in southern Egypt that was dedicated to Khnemu, but had been destroyed by Set. If you want the Nile to work with you, you must repair the temple and work with Khnemu, Imhotep told Djoser. Later that day, Djoser ordered his men to begin repairing the temple of Khnemu. While the temple was being restored, the drought continued to dehydrate southern Egypt. After they had finished rebuilding it and adorned it with sacrificial offerings, the Nile inundated again. Bastet, Amun-Ra drew her attention. "Destroy this agent of chaos." Bastet bellowed a lion's roar and pounced onto the snake. Apep's soldier did not know who this new goddess was and was no match for her wild blitzkrieg of aggression. When the snake tried to coil her, Bastet slipped away. When it went to bite her, she jammed her claws into the monster's eyes. When it tried to smash its weight upon her, she jumped onto its back and ran up the body of the beast while dragging her claws through its scales and splitting the agent of chaos into two pieces. The battle was violent, yet laughably short. Bastet had been created to specifically kill the snake that had invaded the underworld, and she performed her function perfectly. Amun-Ra knew that he had done well by manifesting Bastet, and he quickly rewarded her by giving her a permanent residence among his pantheon of gods. She was charged with being an assistant to Anubis whenever he needed extra help guiding the souls of the dead to the Duat. She was also paired with Hathor and worked with her to shower the essence of love over all of Egypt. She was taught the healing magic of Isis so that she could mend the wounded and cure the sick. Along with Isis, she would help to uphold the moon in the sky to drape a reflection of the sun's light every night when Amun-Ra sailed the sun into the underworld. She was also made the patron deity of all the cats of Egypt. Finally, she was given the ultimate title as a defender of Marat. Wherever the forces of chaos had grown too strong, Bastet would go wherever she was needed and send all of the agents of Apep back into the Noon. The Great Queen Hatshepsut. Amun-Ra had learned much when he was attacked by the snake of Apep that had snuck into the underworld. He wondered how Apep had been able to infiltrate the Duat. He knew that the balance of order and chaos was always in a delicate state, but even so, if Apep was able to sneak such a giant snake into the underworld, then the scales of balance must have become utterly misaligned. He sent out his eye to investigate how order and chaos, life and death, had been tossed so far out of synergy with each other. His eye told him that it was the fault of mankind. Their pharaohs and kings had become lazy and were starting to lose faith in the gods. As always, the mistakes of the people were going to have to be corrected by the gods. Amun-Ra assembled the council of the gods to help offer him suggestions. Isis, Anubis, and many others sat around Amun-Ra on his holy airship. Among those present was Thoth, the wisest of all the gods. When Amun-Ra told everyone about what his eye had informed him of, a palaver of deliberation began. The council of gods discussed the different kings and pharaohs that had ruled over Egypt. They all agreed that none had come anywhere near equaling the just reign of Osiris. In fact, it seemed that each new generation was only producing less and less worthy men to sit on the throne. Maybe that is what has spawned the era we aim to correct. Isis spoke. Order and chaos are out of balance, as we already know. Could that not be because the men and women of Egypt are out of balance with themselves? What are you getting at, Isis? Amun-Ra asked her to clarify. Isis reminded all the gods that Egypt had primarily been ruled and governed by men, while women only played a secondary role in leadership. There had been Mer-Neith, who once ruled as a pharaoh, and there was also Nimathap, who followed her, but they were the only women who were ever given leadership over all of Egypt. You truly believe that this is the reason why chaos and order have fallen out of balance so much? Amun-Ra asked Isis. It makes sense, Amun-Ra, Thoth said. If only one of the sexes remains in a position of power over the other for too long, the men and women will forget that they are all the children of the gods. We must never forget how delicate the minds of mortals are. The wisdom of Thoth was understood by Amun-Ra. He knew what had to be done. Then we shall give rise to the Queen of Egypt, he announced to all of the gods. They all agreed to the plan, but did not know which woman would be worthy to sit on the throne. Currently, there is no such woman, Thoth informed everyone. Before we can elect a special woman to rule over Egypt, she must first be born, nor can she be born with only the blood of a mortal. The other gods could see what Thoth was alluding to. All of the pharaohs of Egypt were direct descendants of the gods themselves. As time carried on, however, a rift had developed between the gods and humans. The blood of the gods that coursed through the current leaders of Egypt's veins, though still divine, had become diluted by the sands of time and forces of chaos. Do you claim, Thoth, that one of us will have to give our essence to a mortal woman so that she may give birth to a daughter of the gods? Amun-Ra asked. Thoth did not give a direct answer. He only gave the sign of silence. I understand, Amun-Ra responded. He then disbanded the council of the gods. He told them all that if a mortal woman was to give birth to a daughter directly seeded from the gods, then the future queen of Egypt would have to be his very own daughter. He then sent out his eye to find a suitable woman to be the mother of the future queen. When his eye returned, she told him that in the city of Thebes there was a woman named Ahmose, who was married to a king named Thutmose. Ahmose had not yet given birth to a child, and her womb was fertile and as pure as a virgin forest. The next day, Amun-Ra summoned Horus. Amun-Ra was going to have to leave his divine airship to go and meet with Ahmose, and had chosen Horus to watch over his ship while he was gone. May your mission bear great success, Amun-Ra, Horus announced before Amun-Ra left to visit Ahmose. Amun-Ra did not visit the palace where Ahmose lived alone. He brought Thoth and Isis with him. Even though the future queen of Egypt was to be bred by Amun-Ra, both Isis and Thoth had a role to play in bringing this unborn female child into the world as well. First, Thoth cast a spell over the entire palace. Very quickly, everyone in the palace fell into a deep and restful slumber. Amun-Ra then found where Ahmose was sleeping. He looked over her and was very satisfied with her appearance. She was as his eye had described her, beautiful and worthy of being the mother to the Queen of Egypt. Amun-Ra then looked over at her husband, Thutmose. A fortunate mortal you are to be married to such a woman as Ahmose. Amun-Ra then performed a magical spell of his own and transformed his being into a pure bead of light. He then shifted his body of light over Thutmose and entered into his body. Thutmose then awoke, but it was not Thutmose. The body was that of Thutmose, but the mind and heart had been overtaken by Amun-Ra. He then signaled to Thoth to cast a separate spell over Ahmose, and she awoke in a trance. Her body moved freely, yet her mind remained in a state of sleep. Thutmose, controlled by Amun-Ra, embraced her in his arms and told her what her destiny was. Rejoice in silence, Ahmose, most blessed are you. who will give birth to the daughter of Amun-Ra, and she will one day become queen of Egypt. Amun-Ra, in the body of Thutmose, made love to Ahmose. She was impregnated by him without anyone knowing, except the gods. Before they left, Isis cast a spell of blessing over the womb of Ahmose. May this child grow into an adult who is not just worthy of the throne, but deserving to act as the child of Amun-Ra. Then Thoth removed his spell from the palace, and everyone inside awoke all at once. Amun-Ra returned to his ship that was the sun, and took hold of the helm once more. He bid Horus thanks for watching over the ship and sent him away. By then it was getting close to nightfall, and Amun-Ra prepared to descend into the land of the dead again. 9 months later, Ahmose gave birth to a daughter who was named Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut lived a life that was normal for all children of royalty. She was raised via the strictest of schedules and went through the most meticulous of schooling. She was taught to read, write, as well as the geometry and mathematics that were only given to members of royal households. Everything that was taught to Hatshepsut she mastered very quickly. Her teachers could hardly keep up with her, and often told stories about how she was the brightest child any of them had ever seen. She also excelled in athletics and all sorts of competitive games. By the time she was reaching her teenage years, her reputation for being an almost perfect human being had preceded her. What none of the mortals knew was that Hatshepsut was always being watched by the gods. Amun-Ra constantly sent his eye to observe the development of his daughter. He had ordered Hathor to watch over the child, and if there was ever any trouble to fall upon her, then Hathor was to remove the trouble immediately. Bastet and Thoth watched over Hatshepsut as well, along with many other gods. Never before had a mortal been as protected and defended from the forces of chaos more than Hatshepsut. What even Hatshepsut herself didn't know was that she was visited by the gods in her dreams almost every night while she was growing up. While awake, she was being trained by men and women on how to become a proper leader, but at night she was trained by the gods. She was spirited away to the land of the dead and shown the great secrets of life and death by both Anubis and Osiris. Her soul was placed in the center of Amun-Ra's airship, where he taught her about the balance between order and chaos. She was taken to the house of Thoth, where he bestowed great wisdom upon her. Both Isis and Nephthys came to her often and taught her how she could create various medicines. The gods had taken every effort to make sure that Hatshepsut would become a fine queen. When Hatshepsut reached the age of 20, the then ruling pharaoh of Egypt passed away. Being a daughter of royalty, Hatshepsut and her family attended the funerary proceedings and paid homage to the fallen pharaoh. After the funeral ended, a beam of light that was the manifestation of Amun-Ra came down from the sky and enveloped Hatshepsut. All who had attended the pharaoh's funeral saw this happen and fell to their knees in worship. Then Hatshepsut opened her mouth and spoke, but it was the voice of Amun-Ra that seeped out of her lips. "Hear me, people of Egypt. Many of you may know me as Hatshepsut, but what you do not know is that I am the daughter of Amun-Ra, the king of the gods." Amun-Ra used Hatshepsut as a vessel to communicate his divine message to the world of man. He announced through her that she was to be crowned the new ruler of Egypt. There was no resistance from the other royal members of Egypt. They all agreed willfully that Hatshepsut was born of a divine nature. If she had not been there, the voice of Amun-Ra would have never sounded from her mouth. Hatshepsut continued to dream of the gods throughout her life. She often spoke with her divine father, Amun-Ra, and followed his advice in regard to all proceedings. With the voice of Amun-Ra never far from her ear, Hatshepsut became one of the most successful rulers in all of Egyptian history. For 20 years, Hatshepsut ruled over Egypt. She was successful in warfare, but that was not what her reign was to be remembered for. During her era, she had constructed great temples and negotiated new trading routes to be opened with the nations surrounding Egypt. Under her divine wisdom, Egypt became a very wealthy country and was bestowed with a long era of peace and balance. She was buried in the Valley of the Kings, along with all of the other great rulers of Egypt. Sphinx and the Prince. The lineage of Hatshepsut continued after her death. After she died, her son became the next pharaoh. He was named after Hatshepsut's human father, Thutmose. The name Thutmose carried on throughout the entire history of Hatshepsut's bloodline, for it was considered a royal and magical name. Thutmose, the son of Hatshepsut, was a fine pharaoh in his own right, and by the end of his life, he had left Egypt in a well and balanced state. He then passed on into the Duat as well, and his son, Amenhotep, took over the throne. Amenhotep had many different children between his wives and consorts, and to carry on the tradition of his royal family, one of his sons was bestowed with the name of Thutmose. It was well known to all who lived in the royal palace that Thutmose was the most favored child of Amenhotep. Many of the people who did not live in the royal palace thought that being the favorite son of the pharaoh must have brought many advantages, but it was actually the opposite for young Thutmose. All of Amenhotep's other children were jealous of Thutmose, and he was often the victim of ridicule and harassment. Very early in his life, Thutmose developed a misanthropic view for his brothers. He took any opportunity he could to escape their envious eyes. He often ventured out into the desert just to be alone. When alone in the desert, there was nothing to bother or harass him. Besides running off to the desert, Thutmose found a great pleasure in competitions of athletics. He learned, no matter what the conditions of weather, how to place an arrow directly in the center of a target. He had an innate ability to master the horses of Egypt and parlayed the skill into becoming a very talented charioteer. Those were Thutmose's only true allies in life, the desert and the games he excelled at. One day, there was a celebration dedicated to Amun-Ra within the palace where Thutmose lived. He went to sleep early the night before so he could wake up at the first crack of dawn and escape to the desert. He also used some of his allowances to pay off 2 servants who lived within the palace to act as helpers. Although Thutmose often preferred to be alone, there were occasions where he would add a servant to his party in case he needed help taking the game he hunted back to the palace. By noon, Thutmose had not been able to find anything worthy of hunting. The sun was also blistering hot that day, and he soon grew tired of being followed by his servants. He sent them home, and then decided that instead of hunting, he would offer a prayer to his favorite god, Horus. After he had finished praying to Horus, he began to grow restless again. Thutmose normally never traveled too far away from his home, but he was feeling a sense of wanderlust that day, and was compelled to explore the desert further. He knew there were pyramids close by and wanted to see them up close for himself. When he found the pyramids, his heart was stirred with joy. They were the most colossal edifices he had ever seen, and a sense of awe fell over him as he gazed upon the magnificent structures. He remained there for several minutes without speaking or even thinking. He was simply one with the desert, nothing more than another marking in the sand that had been created by the gods. His mind went blank. It had emptied of all thought, both positive and negative. No words passed through his head. While staring at the pyramids alone, he, for the first time in his entire life, felt truly free. There was no stimulus or sensation. There was no wants, no complaints. He simply was, and nothing more. Look to the right. Those words were the first thoughts that Thutmose had ever since he came upon the Great Pyramids. He followed the guidance of the words that entered his head, and when he looked to the right, he saw a mound of sand that seemed irregular. He examined it further and began to brush the sand. What he saw when he had cleared the hill of sand swept him off his feet. He was correct to assume that this small hill was not just mere sand and rock. Underneath, it was a statue of Horus. He immediately began to pray to Horus again. Unlike his first prayer, this second spiritual offering to Horus was cloaked in tear-inducing emotion. Thutmose was so moved by finding the hidden image of Horus that he reached out to the falcon-headed simulacrum of the god and brushed its brow. "Hear me, prince." A voice boomed out of the statue along with a gale of wind that knocked Thutmose onto his backside. He became frightened and almost ran away, but then he found the courage of heart and remained before the statue of the one who had conquered Set. "Thutmose," the voice softly repeated, "know that what you are hearing is the voice of Horus. I have watched you, Thutmose, and know that you have often abstained from the royal pleasantries of man. You have often selected to not harm your brothers who aim to besmirch your clean heart. Thutmose, you have chosen wisely." Thutmose felt the pinch of fear creeping up on him again. The fact that Horus was his favorite god was irrelevant. Being in the presence of any god can be just as intimidating as being in the presence of a demon. The voices and actions of the gods were never meant to be directly thrust onto the brains of mere mortals. "Listen well, Thutmose. This speech I give to you is your initiation into the great mysteries of life and death, of order and chaos, and of the duality that must permeate through all of existence. Yet it is an initiation only. If you see your initiation through, then you will certainly one day be crowned the Pharaoh of Egypt. After you become Pharaoh, all of the splendor of the material world will be offered to you. If you are a just Pharaoh, then you will be rewarded in the underworld with gifts that will make this world's pleasures pale in every comparison." "What must I do?" Thutmose asked the statue of Horus. "That is simple, Thutmose. You must remain true of heart. If you truly desire to be my representative, then you must first pledge an oath to me. After that, you must uphold the promise we contract with each other. This is how gods and men prosper together. You benefit me, and I shall benefit you." Thutmose knew that there would never be a single day where he would not honor Horus. He accepted the challenge without argument. "How do I begin?" Thutmose asked. "Touch my brow again, directly between my eyes, and then announce your intention. I will not give you words to repeat when you state your intention. The words must rise from your own heart." Thutmose placed his hand between the eyes of Horus and shouted to the heavens. "Hear me, all of Egypt. I am Thutmose, the servant of Horus. I will honor his greatness every day of my life, and I will be crowned the Pharaoh of Egypt." Thutmose then lost consciousness and fell onto the sand. After he awoke, he saw the statue of Horus silently staring down at him. A thought entered his mind. Was it all a dream, or a spell of insanity? No. My faith in Horus must never waver. Thutmose then returned to his home. He expected his brothers to bother him upon his return, but none did. They seemed to have suddenly lost all interest in harassing Thutmose, almost as if their jealousy had been removed by an unseen flaming sword. He continued to pray to Horus throughout the rest of his life, and when he was crowned pharaoh, his first act was removing the sand he had discovered while gazing at the wondrous pyramids. It turned out that the statue of Horus that he had found was just the tip of a much larger structure. An entire temple that was dedicated to Horus had been hidden under the sand for ages. Thutmose restored the temple to a pristine condition that was deserving to be bestowed with the honor of Horus. He then ordered his men to dig deeper into the sands and discovered that surrounding Horus's temple were grand sphinxes. Thutmose knew these holy structures were sacred Goliaths that embodied the entire symbolic traditions of the gods, and he restored the sphinxes as well. Thutmose grew into a just and respected pharaoh. Although he did not openly speak of it so much, he did not govern the people of Egypt by the standard methods of politics. He instead prayed to Horus and asked him for guidance on all matters of importance, and Horus never failed to answer his call and gift him with advice that could only be given by the gods. By the time Thutmose, representative of Horus, became pharaoh, the gods of ancient Egypt had receded into the background. They would always remain in the shadows, battling the forces of chaos and doing all they must to maintain balance. Yet mankind had evolved since they were first born from Amun-Ra's tears. Mankind was left to govern themselves, and only the wisest, like Thutmose, the sacred priestesses, and magicians, would call upon the gods to receive divine wisdom and guidance even through the darkest of nights and most tumultuous of days.